So good evening, everyone. I guess the rain has kept people at home. I want to welcome everyone to the December 18th Fairfax Town Council meeting. And I'd like to begin the evening with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So I think something needs to be said because this is a historical moment, and it's only the third time that a sitting president of the United States has actually been impeached. That happened just a couple of hours ago. So I spent most of the day alternating between watching the Planning Commission meeting and the impeachment hearings. So I think with that in mind, there's a lot of intensity in the world. And I actually saw an article this morning, Dick Spotswood's column in the IJ this morning, and it was titled, "Marin Problems Wouldn't Be Considered Big Issues Elsewhere." And I thought about that in the context of the fact that we have some big issues here tonight, but I thought it important just to remind ourselves and everyone who's either watching or out there tonight that I think it's important to keep things in context. I brought a resolution last December to declare December a month of gratitude month in the town of Fairfax. So I thought, as Dick Spotswood pointed out, that one of the biggest problems until last week in San Rafael was that the train horn was too loud. And he said, let's keep in perspective that in Oakland, the sound of a shooting is potentially happening at the same time. And now we've silenced the horn. So in the hope that we will silence the guns and the shootings, and in the context of how really blessed we are here, I'd like to start this town council meeting and thank everyone for coming. So, announcements.
Excuse me, Madam Mayor.
Oh, roll call?
Yes.
Okay. Madam Clerk, could we please have a roll call?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Kohler.
Here.
Councilmember Hellman.
Here.
Vice Mayor Ackerman.
Here.
Councilmember Reed.
Here.
And Mayor Goddard.
Here. So now, we need to approve the agenda and affidavit of posting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion, Kohler, second Reed, and all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good, okay.
Aye.
Announcements. So the town hall offices will be closed December 24th through the 1st of January, reopening on Thursday, January 2nd of 2020. And the next regular town council meeting will be Wednesday, January 15th. So it is not the first Wednesday in January, it is on January 15th. There are vacancies on boards and commissions. You can always pick up an application at Town Hall or on the town website. And for more information, you can contact the town clerk or visit www.townoffairfax.org. We have up to 2 vacancies on the Climate Action Committee. We have 1 vacancy on the Open Space Committee and 1 upcoming scheduled vacancy as of the 31st of January on the Planning Commission. Please remember, and especially right now in the holidays, that the Fairfax Food Pantry is open on Saturdays from 8:30 to 10:30 at the Fairfax Community Church, and that's at 2398 Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. They always need volunteers. Please let people know, and if anyone you know or yourself needs some extra food, please go and take advantage of that service in the town
Mayor,
of Fairfax. Are the times changed?
Well, there's a couple of Saturdays that they're not open.
Hannah, did you have the details on that?
I'm not sure what that is. They were announced at our last meeting.
Let me look
I
real
thought
quick
that might have
and
been
I'll-
corrected.
Yeah, I'll make that adjustment.
Can we put that, please, on the website so that people are clear? I don't want people going there and having it be closed. Hannah, you got Okay, awesome, thank you.
Will do.
And there will be a meeting to form the Cascade Striping Project Resident Subcommittee. That meeting is on Saturday. That's this Saturday, December 21st, and it's from 10 to 11 a.m. right here in the Fairfax Women's Club.
Mayor, I have a quick announcement.
Yes, please.
I just want to announce that tonight, is our last meeting with Hannah Politzer. She'll be moving on, and I gave her a little memory of Fairfax. You might just want to pull it out, just so you can always remember us, and thank you for your work these last few months. And our next meeting, we'll be seeing Michelle Gardner again. So you can always remember us, or you can always come to our council meetings. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, everyone. I mentioned this last meeting, but it's been really great working with everyone, and I've really felt welcome here in Fairfax, and I won't be gone, too far, so if you ever need anything, I'll be around.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Hannah. And now it's time for open time for public expression. So this is an opportunity for folks to speak on something that is not on the agenda. You will all have 3 minutes as an individual and 5 minutes if you are speaking for a group. Please.
Deborah Benson, Cascade Drive. I wanted to say thank you about a few things. It used to be when a town council meeting was going to be coming up, there was a little wooden sign that hung in the park, and that stopped happening. A couple of years ago, Kathy Flores and I got together in her house, and with our own funds, created 4 signs announcing the town council meetings, and she was really regular about every month going down and placing those signs so that people knew there was going to be a council meeting. And I want to thank her, and I also want to thank whoever is responsible for having this big, wonderful sign made that's in the park announcing the council meetings. I want to thank you, Mayor Goddard, for giving us 3 minutes to speak. And I also want to thank whoever's responsible for, I think, the much improved and better navigable website that we have. Oh, also, since they still have some time, I wonder what the what the status of the Cascade pathway is from Cascade to Pine. I know that some work has been done on it. I'm wondering about the rest.
Yeah, there's an encroachment issue up at the top. Mark?
Yeah, it turns out that the tenant was a little bit, he didn't want the stairway to go through that was there, but he's no longer there, and the owner has moved in, and she's amicable to having the stairway completed. So we'll be
Wonderful.
working with her to get that done.
I spoke with him. He seemed a little testy. Thank you.
Chris.
Town council members, staff, and fellow Fairfax citizens, my name is Christopher Lang. I live on Canyon Road. Using open time to bring you up to speed on the Climate Action Committee's work. There are a couple of very interesting ideas coming up. I was told that open time was an appropriate time to communicate. So I'm taking the initiative and mentioning 2 things we've been focusing on, 3. One is changing the Fairfax town code so there'll be less greenhouse gases emitted in future construction according to county and state guidelines. It's not my bailiwick, but I'm just letting you know what we've been talking about. And the other thing we've been talking about is an idea of mine is called the Fairfax Non-Motorized Transportation Encouragement Program. And under the auspices of that weighty title, I've proposed some projects that are in the Fairfax Pedestrian Bicycle Master Plan to be adopted by the council and staff. So you'll be getting that recommendation probably next month. It's things that the Climate Action Committee seem to take quite some time to work its way through the consensus and emails and Brown Act rules and all like that. So that's pretty important. So that's going to be coming up. And I'm looking forward to the Cascade Striping Project Residents Subcommittee. And that should be really solid. It's good to have a sort of, what do you call those things? Not design review, but charrette. The charrettes.
That's on the agenda. So.
Really useful. So I'm not going to speak to that.
Thank you.
But one final thing, as the Climate Action Committee's work is reviewing the town's purchasing policies. one of the latest purchases was a little tricycle scooter for parking enforcement. And this is not my personal cup of tea, but I wanted to report to you that we are going to be reviewing the town's purchasing policies to try to reduce the use of fossil fuels in the future, and put it very, very succinctly. Okay? So thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak in open time? I wanted to actually piggyback on what Deborah brought, and that is to thank Kathy and Deborah for bringing those signs. That really initiated something and made it clear that we needed to do a better job in letting people know. And Garrett Toy really took up the ball and rolled with that and making sure that that big sign was made. So thanks to everyone. And so, moving on, we are now going to move on to the regular agenda. And item 1 on the regular agenda is to authorize the town manager to retain a contractor to build the replacement bus shelter that's to be located in the parkade. Since Garrett Toy is not here, he had a family obligation, we will have a staff report by Mark Lockaby. Thanks, Mark.
So Garrett asked me to not just read the whole staff report, but there were a few, a few items from the last council meeting that we wanted to look into. One of the items of concern is if the project exceeds $60,000, we need to formally bid the project, so we need to keep that in mind. We're planning on getting at least three bids from local contractors, and then we'll decide from that point. We'll need to talk to them and see how we can work out having volunteers work with them and what portions the contractors can do. I think we're looking at having the contractor do the heavy lifting and volunteers doing some of the lighter work on the project. And so I think I want to turn it over to John and he can talk about it some more.
Great.
Before you do that, I just have a question on, in the staff report, I had asked that we put something up temporarily because people were sitting out in the rain. And the staff report mentioned some sort of better temporary shelter since we're not going to be able to build this shelter in a month. What was in mind when it talks about
Garrett,
something different?
Yeah, Garrett had mentioned getting another, like a more permanent type tent, one that's not a pop-up, that you kind of, but one that's constructed, a little more expensive, a little nicer than the cheapest one available that's out there now.
If I may, I did talk with Garrett about that when I saw that one come up, because obviously there's no weatherproofing with that one, and so we talked about potentially a canvas, one of those sort of coated canvas tents that would then have some siding, but he is looking into that, and we'll make sure that that is up
Okay,
after the holiday.
thank you.
Yeah, you know, and the volunteers have several of those with sides, so maybe that's a good use.
Okay, so John, please, let us know what's going on.
Good evening, council members, staff. So I guess last time I was here, there were some questions or some requests that I look into certain options, and some of those were plexiglass. The concern was that there wasn't enough weather protection. Excuse me. That was one concern. There was a concern about the roof being metal, and there was also a concern about possibly diverting rain water to a tree. So I'll just kind of hit those points here. I looked into the plexiglass panels, and those would be 3 panels per side, and they would obviously have to be put in. I got a price for those, and then I estimated the labor, and that would add about $1,350 to the estimated cost. I also looked into clear vinyl, like a drop-down tarp with, they would have, like that would be held in with rivets or little, there's a name for them, they're like twist rivets or grommets. The 20 mil, which is pretty heavy and fire resistant, which was a plus. 2 pieces that would hang down and again attach, maybe on all 3 sides. For the 2 sides, that turned out to be $900, and that's USA made. So that's where I ended with that. So it looks like if we did want some weather protection, the vinyl I think would be the way to go. It would just need to be, as we discussed last meeting, somebody would have to take it out maybe during the summer and then put it back during the winter. And then there was the roof. I believe Council members Ackerman and Reed asked about a standing seam metal roof. And Councilmember Ackerman gave me a number to a place. I called them. They have a supplier in Marin. And for all the pieces, to put that roof together, it was $1,250. But if you take off that price from the original estimate of $1,500 and take out the 20% for the overhead and profit, there's a net savings of about $550. And that would be with volunteer. I won't speak for Ackerman, but I believe there was somebody volunteered to help with the roof, and I did as well. So we could save some money there. And so it's kind of a wash. It wasn't too far off from the original estimate, so it's kind of nominal. And then Mayor Goddard asked about diverting rain runoff from the roof, and I kind of looked at that, and it seemed that getting something over to the tree was a little cumbersome, and I think we thought if it was raining anyway, it might not be too beneficial. I mean, typically if you divert rain, it goes into a catch system, but if maybe we had, flower pots or something on the side, that could be something. But I think that putting in a downspouts and gutters isn't that big of a deal. That could be done, we decided, for nominal cost. And basically, those were the 3 items that I had. And they're currently trying to source some reclaimed timbers. I have a connection. I still haven't heard back. But that was it. And I think that's all the stuff that I had. Yes?
Great. Any questions of John?
Just one question, John. I think I missed. You mentioned the vinyl that goes on the side. Is it
Yes.
vinyl? And what did you say it costs? Is it $900 per side?
No, 2 pieces, approximately 11 foot by 5 foot each, are $900 for the 2.
Oh, okay. Okay. So thank you for working so hard on this,
Yeah.
John. I know you, and you've also sat here very patiently last meeting. So thank you very much for all your work.
And one more thing too, just while I'm here, I know I just heard that you're going to maybe getting 3 estimates. I did get an estimate from a contractor that I know, and he is out. I think I had mentioned the beginning of the year, but it's now the 2nd or 3rd week of February if we were to utilize his estimate. So. Good.
Any other questions of John or staff before we go out to the public? Barbara.
So, Mark, I'm not sure if you're able to answer this, but I know John did locate this contractor that would be under our amount that we would need to go out for bids. Is that a possibility of going directly to that person as long as we check and make sure that there's no problem, that it's got a license, et cetera?
Yeah, I don't have the answer for that.
Okay.
That would be up to Garrett, I think.
Could you and Garrett look into that?
Yes.
Because I think my preference, as well as I think a lot of folks that ride the bus, would be that happens sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, just the only other thought on the diversion of the water to the tree. I know that, and I can't remember the particulars of what's going on right there next to that bus stop, but a lot of the parking lot now does flow to trees around the parkade anyway. So it may be, just a question of going there on a night like tonight and looking at where the water is going.
True.
It could be going there already, and we can just put that downspout, if there is a downspout, to someplace where it'll flow to a tree or,
Okay.
across the pavement. So then
Yeah.
there's not a tripping hazard, or maybe it'll just do that from dripping off the roof.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
We could put a
Possibility.
massive tank in there. And then we could water the parkade throughout the rest of the
It'd be
year.
a really big tank.
Okay. Anyone else? Or, okay, so take it out to the, thank you, John, so much. Anyone in the public want to comment or have something to say? Come on up.
Chris Lang, Canyon Road, council member, staff, and fellow Fairfaxans. I was head of Chamber of Commerce about 10 years ago, and we had a plan for rebuilding the existing structure with using some donation from Fairfax Lumber and an Eagle Scout being the project leader, and so it wasn't going to be any drawings or shoring up of foundations. It was just sort of a rehabilitate the existing partially rotting redwood structure to get some more life out of it. Unfortunately, the volunteer didn't work out. And so the only reason I'm telling you this now is because one of the ideas that came up, and John's partner, Jane Richardson, was our artistic advisor, was...
Good evening, Sierra.
The Chamber of Commerce actually bought paint for the town after Jane helped us pick out the color to paint all the light poles and utility boxes in the downtown area. And that color was a green. And so if there's going to be any signage or architectural details on the new structure, I think it would be important to continue the design color. And one of the ideas that came up when we were going to rebuild the existing structure, which is now gone, was that there would be a sign, a Fairfax sign, in dark green to match the other colors of the utilities, with gold inlaid letters on all four sides, a professionally made sign, similar to the signs that we erected, the Welcome to Fairfax sign and the bicycle kiosk that I oversaw the building of with a grant. So it would be kind of trying to keep in character the downtown design elements. Other towns have pretty strict rules about that, and I just want to make sure we don't overlook it because I think it's a good idea to have a really beautiful Fairfax sign up there as the final touch in the drawings, et cetera. Thank you.
So if you have any copies of those or anywhere in your files, please bring them to Town Hall so we can take a look. Anyone else in the public want to speak? You okay, Sierra?
Oh, I'm fine. Thanks. Are there pictures up anywhere of has the design changed at all since last time? In terms of the roof line or?
It has not.
And I'm curious about sorry I got here late. I didn't expect you to get to this for 7:30. What do the plexiglass or what do the weather seals look like at this point?
So John already did a brief presentation on that, but he's looking at vinyl sides or some plexi. They're both affordable, and we'll be talking about it and trying to come to a decision. If you have something you want to say.
I'd vote for plexi over vinyl with maybe a steel frame that can be just lifted in and out, and the plexi panels could be changed over time. They're definitely more prone to get scratched up and vandalized, but they're a lot better than tempered glass, which would just shatter. But if it had like a steel frame that could just be screwed in, taken out, stuck underneath the pavilion or something a couple times a year.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Mark Bell, Domingo Avenue. I would also vote for the plexiglass. I mean, if this is supposed to be an incredible statement of Fairfax as it was presented, I think we'd get a better hit for plexiglass than for a canvas vinyl side. And then the other thing, as far as putting it out for bid, why not? Isn't that how things usually are done? Put it out for bid. Those are my points.
Okay, thank you. So we'll bring it back up here. Mark, can you remind us what it is that you actually are looking for from us tonight in terms of direction? What decisions do you want us to make?
Just to give us the go-ahead to continue with the project.
So meaning making a decision around this weathering, or did you want that recommendation direction to staff, or?
So the
Maybe I
recommendation
should look at the
is-
recommendation?
The recommendation is in the staff report.
Okay.
And it's specific, and I think I would just start out by saying I like the idea of the metal roof. It sounds like John has looked into that. I'm not sure about plexiglass because I see it gets very scratched up very easily, and I think John's looked into the vinyl. So I think the plexiglass would be great at first, and then it would be tagged. So my thoughts are, we're here as far as having a design with a few tweaks to it that John has worked on, and I would like to go forward and make a motion to go forward with these recommendations, but I don't want to jump the gun if others want to comment.
Yeah, let's see what everyone has to say. John?
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts on the contractor that John has talked about, I mean, it might be worth talking with him because to answer the comment made by, I guess it was Mark Bell, in terms of going out to bid, that generally, you know, it's competitive and everything like that, but people, it's a bid and it's, you know, sometimes it ends up being more, so it's pretty efficient to use something. But I would have to, I mean, you deal with this all the time, and so perhaps it's worth looking at that before making that decision to go out to bid. Because if it keeps it under 60, then we don't need to. What's the thought?
Stephanie?
Yeah, so this project has been pending for some time, and if we put it out to bid, I feel like, you know, the staff report says, you know, it would take some time if we put it out to bid, and we've known about this for some time, so I feel like if we put it out to bid a few months ago, we could have had the data we needed on costs, and if we told the vendors that we had a local bidder that was offering a competitive rate, they would, you know, potentially come down. That's how it works. So I concur that I would like us to get into the practice of going out to bid on these things. That said, I also like the notion of working with residents and local people. So I just wanted to state that for the record. I also wanted to share that I used this bus stop for over 10 years, and you know, the elements are real, and so you know, the sooner we can get moving on this project, the better. So that's all I have to share.
Bruce? Oh, I'm
Just
sorry,
to-
can we interrupt?
Just to
Mark?
mention, if we do go out to bid, then each bidder needs to be bidding on exactly the same item. So we need to know exactly what volunteers are going to do and what the contractor's going to do. So that'll have to
Understood.
be clarified.
So, yeah, this has been going on for a while, and I think what's before us tonight is to move it along by bidding out for the major portion of the contracting work. And as John Rometis alluded to, I've continued to be happy to volunteer, and I've also talked with Chance Catrano, and a couple of other people have said they would like to work on it as well to put the metal roof on. So if we can bid that, ask for a bid that doesn't include putting the roof on but goes as far as the roof decking, then, and now tonight we're talking about possibly adding gutters and maybe downspouts, so we just need to decide on that before we order the roofing parts, because that all has to fit together. So I think that this can work, and I would hope that we can get it moving fairly quickly. And all I would ask from my point of view would be that we coordinate well so that we can order the materials for the roof after we're absolutely sure that the dimension is going to be what we expect it to be, and so forth. You know, there's just the timing of, so good communication throughout the process, and we should be able to pull this off.
So just for clarification from my colleagues here, I'm not quite sure if you guys are recommending, I understand in general that sending things out to bid is a far better way to do things, but at this moment, given timing and given not exactly being clear on what volunteers are going to do and the costing of the
I think we're
roof,
pretty clear.
do we want to
We know what we'll
authorize
do.
the town manager to retain a contractor not to exceed 60 at this time? And if
So I
so,
would-
could someone make a motion to
I would
that?
like to make a motion to authorize the town manager to retain a contract in an amount not to exceed $60,000 to build the replacement bus shelter located in the parkade. Authorize a contingency reserve of $10,000 for unforeseen field conditions. So if we're doing that, we're going to be going out for bid unless we can come way under. And appropriate $70,000 into CIP Fund 53894 from general fund reserves, with the condition that we would use the metal roof and coordinate closely with John Ramadas as we go forward, and also move forward on a better temporary bus shelter as soon as we can.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'd second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 And anyone opposed?
Well, I still, not sure that we had really settled on
Well, we have
the
to.
decision. Yeah, so I would say I would rather we be going out for bids, but, yeah, so.
But you're willing
I'll vote.
to,
Yeah, I'm happy to do the metal roof. I love the design. Just
So you're
the thing
saying yes.
of seeing whether we could get a competitive bid, that's all.
okay, so all those in favor?
Aye.
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 You can abstain.
Aye.
Yeah, I'll abstain. How about that?
Okay, so,
I'm fine with the shelter.
so motion Kohler, second Reed. Aye,
All ayes except.
all ayes
Bruce.
except for Vice Mayor Ackerman abstain. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
All right.
Thank
Thanks
you,
so
Jane.
much, everyone. Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Okay, so moving right along, we are still on the regular agenda. Regular agenda item number 2 is to introduce and adopt an urgency ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Fairfax, amending Chapter 17.048 of the Fairfax Town Code relating to accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units, and determining the ordinance to be exempt from CEQA. I think our staff report is going to come from our attorney, Janet Colson, with the assistance of Ben Berto.
Yes,
Planning
it's a
Director.
joint effort here. Would you like to start, or do you want me to?
Well, I'll simply say that Janet will be making the presentation, and then staff, based on a PowerPoint, and staff is prepared to answer any questions or offer any clarifications.
Okay, and if I may preface this, just by asking that we all remember that throughout the campaigning and throughout the years, we've always championed the idea that ADUs and JDUs were a way forward for us to deal with the affordable housing crisis that we all know that we are in the midst of. So I just wanted to frame that way for everyone, and let you know that what we're about to hear is equally stunning for all of you as it is for us, and that we will be able to find a way forward, but only if we really dig in and work together to do what needs to be done here. So with that, I'd like to ask for a staff report.
Okay, well, we're trying to get this really brief PowerPoint. I just have a few slides working. Let me tell you why we're here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the urgency ordinance, but also about number 3 on the public hearing, the regular ordinance, because they're identical. And what we're doing tonight is we have an urgency ordinance because we need to have an ordinance in place by January 1st, which is 2 weeks away, because the state this year, the state legislature, enacted a fairly dramatic statutory scheme about ADUs, accessory dwelling units, and JADUs, junior accessory dwelling units. And part of this, you've seen that they've been amending the ADU laws for a number of years. And it seems like every year, pretty much, we've had a new statute to have to deal with. And we've amended our existing code to try to deal with those. And we've thought about it and considered it quite a bit. But this year, it's different. And this year, it is very sweeping. And I think it's fair to say that the legislature is pretty much out of patience with local governments. And so what they've done is they have enacted a statutory scheme that's pretty bare bones, but it has some language in it that is something I've never seen. I've been practicing for almost 30 years, and it says that if any jurisdiction, and this is a statewide application, every city, every county, this is statewide, any jurisdiction that doesn't have an ordinance regarding ADUs or JADUs that is compliant with the state statute in all regards, if there is any piece of it, any small piece that it does not comply with the state statute, that entire ordinance is completely null and void come January 1. And so what that means right now is what we have on the books right now will be null and void come January 1, because clearly what we have right now is not in compliance with this new statutory scheme. And so seeing this happen in October, and the law firm that I'm with, which is down here, Best Best & Krieger, we got a number of attorneys together in our firm because we represent cities statewide, and we formed a housing task force, the new housing laws that you had the presentation on last week, and this is one of those new housing laws, the ADU laws. We drafted up an ordinance to be something like a model ordinance that every jurisdiction could use and then customize to some degree to fit their needs. And that ordinance is what is before you tonight. It has been customized a little bit to meet some Fairfax special needs, but it is an ordinance that is designed to try to be compliant with state statute, so that come January 1st, we do not face the possibility of having our ordinance declared null and void. We want to have a compliant ordinance in place. And if you have a compliant ordinance in place, the state then says you can add in some specific measures that are tied to your particular needs and desires in your local jurisdiction. And so staff, and we've also been to the Planning Commission with this, has tried to add in some additional measures as much as we can that still keeps the ordinance compliant. And those additional measures, I might add, have to be what is known as an objective development standard. So nothing subjective. Everything has to be hard and fast, the number. So we've done things like add in FAR, lot coverage, that sort of things. Those things are not present in the state statutory scheme. State statute basically says you get to build an ADU, and it's 4-foot setbacks on side and rear, and 16 feet in height. And there are a few other requirements, but that's pretty much it. And so if you want things like lot coverage or landscaping or FAR or any of that kind of stuff, you have to add it in specific to your jurisdiction. So we've done that. We've taken the compliant with state code ordinance and added in some things that are, we think will benefit Fairfax, and that's staff and the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission discussed this.
Janet, if I may, FAR is floor area ratio.
Yes, sorry.
And every time you use an acronym, you have to do a push-up.
I do. I apologize. Thank you. So anyway, we've done that. Now that's what the urgency ordinance, which would take effect immediately, is designed to be in place by January 1, so that we have something in place and we're not just dependent on the very bare bones state statutory scheme. So we can have a little bit extra that's Fairfax specific if we do an urgency ordinance and get it in place before January 1. Whenever you do an urgency ordinance, it is a common practice to also do a follow-up regular ordinance. And what I mean by regular ordinance is urgency takes effect immediately. A regular ordinance has to have 2 readings, and it has to be adopted at a regular meeting. And then it takes another 30 days after that before that regular ordinance becomes effective. So it's a longer process. And there's no difference between these 2 ordinances at all. They're identical. It's just the longer process. And the reason why you have a backup, we call it a backup regular ordinance, is because when you do an urgency ordinance, you have to make urgency findings. And if somebody wants to challenge you, they always challenge you on your urgency findings. And so while we feel comfortable about the urgency findings, you never know. And so as a belt and suspenders type of measure, as a safety measure, we always recommend adopting a backup regular ordinance. It's merely a timing thing, because what happens is you'll have your urgency ordinance that'll be in effect January 1st. Your regular ordinance, if it's introduced tonight, would not come up for second read until January 15th. It would then take another 30 days, if it's adopted then, it would take another 30 days for it to be in effect. So it wouldn't be in effect until mid-February at the earliest. And so that, at that point, it takes over from your urgency ordinance, and that's what's in play from then on. We also, though, when we went to the Planning Commission, they wanted to work on this ordinance a little bit more. They understood the urgency, they understood the need for speed to get this in place by January 1, and they understood the need for the regular ordinance as a backup, but they also wanted to continue to work on this. And so they are working on yet a third ordinance, which is another regular ordinance. And it would be at the Planning Commission for a meeting or two, and then it would come to the Town Council for another 2 readings and 30 days after that before it would go into effect. And that third one that they're working on has to do with a lot of the Fairfax specific, and maybe other jurisdiction applicable as well, but things like working about looking at the wildland urban interface, the fire codes, things that we might want to really question adding density into certain areas by adding ADUs in, because this basically says that anywhere you have residential zoning, either single family or multifamily, you can have an ADU. And that's what the state has done. The state has said that we want to increase housing. We're very serious. We're not kidding around. And so we want everybody to be able to build an ADU. And so this third ordinance that isn't on for tonight is something that the Planning Commission will be working on, and we invite everybody to come to the Planning Commission. We're going to be looking at, the wildfire risk. We're going to be looking at a number of other issues. Ben, do you want to chime in? Do you want to?
Well, some of them we actually, based on the Planning Commission's direction, things like creek setbacks, that was something we already added. But
Well, we already added that
Yeah.
in, but some of the things that the planning is still going to be looking at is basically the fire issue, and there's some other things that they're concerned about as far as
there were
density
many
is
things
concerned.
that the Planning Commission
Yeah.
discussed, so.
So that's an ongoing conversation, and that we expect that to be at Planning Commission for a few months, and then it will hopefully come up to council with a recommendation. And so we'll go through this again in a few months. In the spring, we'll probably have yet a third ordinance to be talking with you about. But for right now, we've got an urgency ordinance, and that's the most important part. The backup regular is important, but only from a procedural standpoint, because it's identical to the urgency ordinance. And so would you like to talk about the ordinance, or do you want me to? I can run through. I've got a few slides that I can kind of talk briefly about what's happened here at the state level. So cute picture of an ADU, don't you think? But I don't know if this would fit in everybody's backyard, but this is basically what we're talking about. We're talking about an accessory dwelling unit that you either rent out or you have a relative or somebody living in. These used to be known as granny flats or granny units. Several bills were enacted. The one that's really the most important is AB 881, and it's section 1.5 of that is really the most important part, but we'll go through this for some of the others. The highlights of 881, they've now extended ADUs to multifamily lots. So multifamily residential can also have ADUs. You can have multiple ADUs on one lot. So you can have your house, you can have a portion of it be a JADU, and you can also have then another ADU in the backyard. So you can actually have 3 dwelling units on a lot. That's the state. That's nothing we can do anything about. That is state statute. Maximum 4-foot setbacks on side and rear, another thing we can do nothing about. That is state statute. So no replacement parking. If you convert your garage into an ADU or JADU, you do not have to replace the parking. We cannot require that somebody do that. And they also enacted a requirement that prohibits local governments from requiring that the owner of the property occupy one of the units. And this has a short time frame on it. This particular state statute is only good until 2025, but from January 1st, 2020 until 2025, no local government can require that the property be deed restricted for odor occupancy in one of the units.
Is that for JDUs and ADUs?
Yeah. So it has a section, we call it limited ADUs, because the building permit only is what's required. And you can build a new one with just a building permit only if you follow what's listed in the limited ADU section. So we can't, there's no hearings, there's no subjective requirements, there's no ADU permit fee. It's a building permit only. They come in, if they meet those requirements, they get a building permit and they're good to go. And that's going to be something pretty different, I think, for most people. Non-conforming, okay. What this means, and this really shocks people, but this is what this means. If you have a illegal accessory unit, a shed, let's say accessory building in your yard, in your backyard, and let's say it's not conforming because it's in the setback. So it's built into the setback, and you want to convert that into an ADU, you get to, and you don't have to move it. So you can convert that shed that you have that's in the setback into an ADU, and you don't have to move it. It has to stay in that same footprint. You can tear down the building that's there, the shed, and you stay within that same footprint, and you get to build an ADU. This line that says any inconsistency voids the entire ordinance. There was a provision a few years ago that said any inconsistency would be void, but now it's the entire ordinance is void. I've never seen a clause like this before that, usually you have a severability clause that says if this particular provision is found to be illegal, then the rest of the ordinance still stands. Not anymore. If there is any provision in the ordinance, anything at all, then you will find that your entire ordinance has been wiped clean and you're stuck with just what the state allows, what the state requires. There's some other bills that were passed that dealt with this. Housing elements now must promote ADUs for affordable rent, so that's a change to your housing element. This 587 is really not applicable here, but there is a provision, I don't see where it's going to be useful or applicable anywhere, that allows for a separate conveyance of an ADU, meaning you can sell that ADU, and it's very limited circumstances. I don't think that's really applicable here. And also, HOAs, homeowners associations, are now treated, they're limited like cities are. So if you had a homeowners association that had restrictions that didn't allow ADUs, that's too bad. They now have to comply, they have to allow them. So what we did is, in order for us to get a conforming ordinance, we took the template and we put in our objective development standards, and we're recommending that it be adopted as an urgency ordinance, and then concurrently with a non-urgency as a backup, simply as a procedural safeguard, belt and suspenders. And I think that is the end of those slides. But I'm happy to take questions, or Ben is here, can answer specific questions as well. I'm here more for the procedural aspects of it than for the actual planning aspects of it.
Yes,
Okay.
we also,
Oh, go ahead.
put one thing on your dais regarding the fees. It was brought to our attention that the town's ordinance currently takes the normal fees for an ADU and divides that in two. And so there was some information in your staff report about the amounts that the town has waived over the years in processing ADUs. That half-price fee for ADUs and JADUs was not reflected in the current ordinance. However, if your council is interested in doing so, we have suggested language in the supplement before you tonight.
So just one, I asked for that, but the program wouldn't expire 12/31/21. When we did that, it was 11/1/2017, and it lasted for 10 years. So the language should say program would expire 11/1/27. I mean, whether or not other people like it, but that was an error.
And that was, it was an incentive program primarily to get people to come in and legalize existing illegal ADUs.
But it applied to all ADUs and JADUs. It wasn't just for, it was an amnesty for illegals to come in, but also to encourage more people to build more ADUs.
Right. And that's the other thing to point out. You know, Fairfax has obviously been on the forefront of promoting ADUs, but the state's statutory scheme is a one-size-fits-all. It's statewide, it's across the board, so it doesn't take into account that, you know, some cities have been in the forefront and been doing great things and promoting ADUs. It's basically just a sort of a draconian type of dictate that everybody, every city, every county, everybody start allowing ADUs. And that is to promote housing. And it is hand in hand with some of the other new housing laws that they did. They took the Housing Accountability Act and retitled it Housing Crisis Act. And so right there, that tells you where the mindset was and what this is all about. It's an immediate need to develop housing. One of the other things I'd like to mention is that one of the things we're going to be talking about with the Planning Commission is ways to incentivize getting ADUs to help us with the RENA numbers, and possibility of waiving fees in exchange for a deed restriction for 55 years for low, very low income restrictions. We're thinking that if somebody is willing to deed restrict for 55 years, which is what HCD requires, Housing and Community Development, State Department, requires if you want to count towards your RENA numbers, that we could actually maybe see a silver lining in some of this very otherwise draconian statutory scheme.
Can you please define RENA for people who may not know?
I'm sorry. RENA numbers, Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And those are the numbers of different income categories of housing that the cities, different cities, all cities, have to provide. And we need some help with those numbers, I think.
And,
Okay.
and Janet, would that fall under, on one of your last slides, 671, could you expand on housing elements and must promote? Could you elaborate on that?
Well, one of the elements in the general plan is the housing element. And so everybody has a housing element and they have to be approved by HCD. That's another thing I need to mention. Every single ADU ordinance in the state, every city, every county, their ordinances have to be, you have to send them off to HCD. It's the Department of Housing and Community Development. It's a state agency. And they're the ones who approve the housing elements as well. And they have to review it and approve it. Now, needless to say, this is a huge increase in workload for them. I don't know how long it's going to take, obviously many months. It takes them a long time to review housing elements too. But in the housing element, you need to promote, if you want me to go, let me see where I was.
I just want to understand what is meant by promote.
Must promote ADUs for affordable rent. You need to have language in your housing element that talks about how ADUs are considered affordable housing and how we encourage people and what programs we may have that would encourage people to have an ADU as an affordable unit, a rental unit.
But don't we have that in our housing element?
Sorry?
That's called out in our housing element, I believe.
Yes, there's some policies and programs relating to that.
But there's nothing in the ordinance that says you should have inclusionary.
Not in this particular one. We are saving things like that for the third ordinance that's coming up. It's working its way through Planning Commission because we need to have a recommendation from Planning Commission. Planning Commission needs to have seen that and made a recommendation to council. We can't just start an ordinance here at council because this is zoning. And so it needs to start at the Planning Commission level.
Mm-hmm.
And I might also add that an inclusionary housing ordinance is something that staff is working on with other jurisdictions in Marin County under the funding that the town has applied for under Senate Bill 2. Mm-hmm. So there is some planning funding. The town has submitted a grant application, and we are collaborating with other jurisdictions. There's a number of other jurisdictions that, like Fairfax, do not currently have an inclusionary housing requirement. So we would anticipate within 1 to 2 years, we will have that ordinance ready for consideration by your council.
Thanks.
They've already been directed, that's already on the table for them to contemplate the inclusionary zoning as part of that third ordinance you were referring to?
Well, I think what Janet was talking about is a more specific instance of ADUs, but the inclusionary will be coming up as part of their work.
Okay. So any questions from council for Janet or for Ben? Nothing? At this time? Well, that's a perfect opportunity to go ahead and take this and open it for public comment. And then please, if I could just ask that, we have one more question, excuse me, Frank.
I guess, what is the opportunity or what is the forum to provide feedback and direction to the Planning Commission by the Town Council or the public? Do they just need to show up at those Planning Commission meetings for the third ordinance?
Well, certainly your council can provide direction and suggestions to the Planning Commission. We always relate that to the commission and attempt to incorporate that, since obviously as decision makers.
But in what forum, though? Because they're...
You could do so tonight as part of your discussions, or when this is agendized for the Planning Commission. Obviously, it's not going to be discussed tomorrow night because we have to get the decision from your council. But as we go forward in upcoming meetings, it will be agendized. You can look for the agendas on our website. This will be discussed. Obviously, there's a lot of concerns. So just show up at the meeting and provide your comments.
Well, that's for members of the public. That's for members of the public. I would think that what might be possible here, and it would be up to the council if you'd want to do this or not, is to have an item on an agenda, say in January, where you would give feedback to the Planning Commission. Or you could do so tonight as well. Give feedback to the Planning Commission, say, Planning Commission, we'd like for you to look at these particular items. We think that you should include that in your study for this third ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
All righty. So if I might just remind everyone, 3 minutes if you're an individual, 5 if you're representing a group, and if you would please self-monitor the time, it's there. Otherwise, Hannah's just going to give me a nod. It's very uncomfortable to cut people off, and so I think we can do this if everybody just kind of keeps a little bit of track of the time. Please.
Thank you, Mayor. Frank Eager, Middle Way, representing Save Fairfax tonight. I distributed comments to each of your locations this evening that I'm going to try to read. If I run out of time, my comments are both for items 2 and 3. If I run out of time speaking on 2, I'll pick it up where I left off for item number 3. Item number 2 requires a 4/5 vote. Item number 3 needs only 3 yes votes to pass tonight. Fairfax needs to add to their findings and amend these ordinances to protect the livability and affordability of our town when new ADUs are approved. The state's one-size-fits-all does not work for Fairfax. The fire danger in Fairfax is greater than most California communities. Last night at the Fairfax Tree Committee meeting, our Ross Valley Fire Chief said the Cascade Canyon is one of the worst in the county, compounded by access and egress issues. There's been stories in the newspapers. The San Francisco Chronicle on December 15th ran a story about wildfire score can derail insurance. And that's all about homeowners losing their insurance policies for fire and homeowners insurance because insurance companies are canceling those policies in a number of wild and urban interface areas in California. That's a good article you should read. Fairfax has historically challenged state zoning and pesticide laws. 4 times, the California Supreme Court refused to overturn First District decisions that set statewide case law and upheld Fairfax ordinances. These are ordinances where the Fairfax town attorney said, you can't do that, it's a violation of state law. But the town council believed so strongly in protecting our town that it passed ordinances, and a number of them went on up to the state Supreme Court. I'll mention in the comments, it's written in the comments, about a San Mateo County Superior Court rejecting a 2017 state housing law mandate, and that's in the Chronicle on December the 8th. And down in San Mateo County, the judge threw out a state law that mandated certain housing requirement be approved in San Mateo, the city of San Mateo. You need to take a look at that decision. The issues. Allowing new ADUs on septic tanks during the 60s, Fairfax had problems with septic tanks leaching into the creeks and impacting anadromous fisheries. In 1973, Fairfax passed an ordinance requiring that any new development be connected to the public sewer system. This is why Canyon Road homeowners agreed to tax themselves and install a sewer system from Canyon Road Bridge to the end of Canyon Road. Outer Cascade Drive is still on septic tanks. Reasonable findings to make and conditions to add to the ordinance. Finding, Fairfax had problems with septic tanks leaching into creeks and adversely impacting anadromous fisheries. The new AD ordinance allows hookups to septic system. Ross Valley Sanitary District number 1 is a public agency that handles wastewater in Fairfax. The regular ordinance should require any ADU built after January 1st, 2020 to be hooked up to the public sewer system, the Ross Valley Sanitary District. Another finding, Fairfax is listed, this is recommended findings, Fairfax is listed in a recent nationwide emergency evacuation study showing 800 communities as number 13 in California, number 1 being the worst, in communities' options to evacuate. In Marin County, where many homes are tucked into the hillsides along narrow, winding roads, residents could encounter some of the toughest traffic jams during an emergency evacuation, according to a new report. The study done by Streetlight Data Inc. was inspired in part by the gridlock residents of Paradise faced during the Camp Fire last year. Researchers looking at communities of 40,000 residents or fewer across the country showed how traffic would flow during an emergency and pointing out potential bottlenecks. Santa Venetia, Sleepy Hollow, Marin City, Sausalito, Corte Madera, San Anselmo, and Fairfax were among the most problematic in the Bay Area, according to the report. I would agree that we have major evacuation issues in this county. Marin County Fire Chief Jason Weber said, these 7 communities are examples, but it goes beyond that. There's a lot more to be done. I'm just about going to run out of time, so I'll pick up on the balance of this for your second hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Sierra
Salen. I see accessory dwelling units, and I also think affordability, and I know our community's changed considerably in the last 10 years, 5 years, 20 years, 40 years, just for affordability. And what used to be probably $120 40 years ago for a small shack substandard living place is probably $1,200 to $2,500 now. What's that? It's more than that. Anyway, I wonder about accessory and affordability. Probably the nut of the problem is population. What are we doing about population control? Which will probably take care of itself one of these days from the looks of things, but we shall see. What do I have down here? I watched the last meeting with the guy from the state spelling this all out from home on my couch, and I just about fell off the couch listening to him, and I felt, if anybody's familiar with Lord of the Rings books, I felt like I was listening to the mouth of Sauron, and it was just, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. We've got a problem with population and living situations, but we also have local we're not Los Angeles, and we're not San Rafael, and we're not other places, and one size fits all. Frank said something, I think, last week about something that happened in the 70s. I can't remember what it was, but Fairfax fought the state, and Fairfax was classified as one classification and not as another. And if that's true, then I think we might have an out for some stuff in that if this is the same issue I'm thinking about. But how do we fight this? It's coming in on January, but I think last time I heard that we're not even going to know what the parameters are until May or June, even though it's passed or takes effect in January, but there's going to be issues with it that aren't cleared up by the legislature until June or later, perhaps. Anyway, more housing could be a good thing. 4-foot clearance for setbacks, and then 12 feet high. That sounds pretty high. I've got a neighbor with like a 12-foot high ivy wall, and that's pretty ridiculous.
16 feet.
Yeah. 16 feet high with 8 feet away from places. If you got 4 feet on either side, that's there. Anyway. Yeah.
Thanks, Sierra. Hi, Larry.
Hi. So Larry Bragman, and just here as a resident, but last night my agency unanimously passed a prohibition of charging a hookup fee, connection fee, for ADUs as we're required to do under 881. So 881, when I first saw it, I looked at it from the utility point of view, but as I mentioned last night when we passed the prohibition, the municipal governments have a much harder job because you have to somehow carve out the exceptions to protect local safety and take into account local conditions. And obviously Fairfax has a lot of unique local conditions. We have public safety, fire, slides, narrow streets, all these things that we can and you must objectively identify within our jurisdiction can be used as a basis to carve out reasonable exceptions consistent with the intent of 881. Another thing that I think Fairfax should consider, even though this law takes away your ability or the town's ability to have a discretionary hearing about approval or disapproval, is notice. That's completely lacking from 881, and I think we as a municipal entity can require notice to the neighbors so they know what's happening, so they can file objections and protect their rights to perhaps challenge the approval. So I think that is a fundamental flaw in 881 that we can address, and I think that's legally defensible. I had one other thing I wanted to add, which is that within 881 itself, there's a procedure whereby your statute is going to go to HCD for them to comment on, and if they don't approve it, it's going to come back to you. So there is a back and forth dialectical opportunity for us to tweak the statute. So while I understand council's concern about having our local protections wiped off the book, and I do agree we need to pass an emergency ordinance and probably the regular ordinance. I didn't know you had a third one working. But I think it's really important to keep this on the front burner because what I am concerned about is that by having an emergency and a regular ordinance that don't address certain conditions, we might create entitlements that we later realize should not have been granted in certain circumstances. So you do have a very challenging task before you, but I think there are ways for you to go forth and to really create a good locally based statute that provides fairness for local residents and protects the community, public safety, and character. So good luck.
Thank you, Larry.
Mark Bell, Domingo Avenue. Just a couple points to add. One is if there is no limit or condition of affordability, then really this is a joke for years. How many people are looking for places? What are people paying now? What will they continue to pay? How many units would have to come into Fairfax before you would actually see a price reduction in the ability of, in the cost of rent and what people can pay for? If they're going to rent at market rate, $1,800, $2,000 a month, $1,600 a month, if you're working at the Good Earth, good luck. And that's our largest employer who's local. I don't see how, unless we can put some type of limitation on what can be charged as rent, I don't see what this really does. The second thing I don't understand and continues here is everything that seems to come before the town council is exempt of CEQA. How can that be? California Environmental Protection is CEQA. And there's very little about being able to shove in as many ADUs as you can shove on a lot with no parking. That's not going to affect the environment. We have flooding. What about birds? How about tree cover? How about drainage? How much water do trees suck up? If they can cut down 400-year-old trees and they can put in 2 little trees to replace them somewhere at some point, really, what's the ratio? You're looking at what? Tens of thousands of gallons that are held by a tree versus 60? How long is it going to take those trees to be able to sop up water? In 2005, 2006, everybody was concerned about flooding. We had flooding, it was all over. But if you start taking out canopy and you start taking out trees, we're going to have flooding like you would not believe. And good luck for those with flood insurance.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, Roberta.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for holding this meeting tonight. Roberta Antes, 2 Snowden, Fairfax. I came out tonight to understand the situation better, and I appreciate the meeting. I'd written before that I was uneasy about the by right aspect of this law, but I see now that if we don't write objective standards for our new ordinances, for our new ordinance, we risk losing virtually all input in the construction of ADUs and JDUs. I've been a fan of the conditional use permit for years now because I feel that it allows for public input on the most important aspects of any given building project. But I see here that CUPs are only required if the units don't comply with the new standards. And no CEQA studies are required either. So the democratic process, as we've known it, is once again compromised. Over the years, what's brought me to the mic, almost every time, is the reduction or loss of the democratic process, whether I like the project or not. I feel that we do our best for the town and the project when people get to weigh in, even if I don't happen to like what other people say. People who have opposed my positions in the past have offered outstanding ideas, and I applaud those people, and they're vital to the process. It's troubling to me that more and more the state or federal government is taking this process away from townspeople. We've seen it in the zoning laws, we've seen it with 5G, and now these small units. I'm definitely not against ADUs and JDUs, and I feel that they provide one possible solution to the housing crisis, but I also don't support a free-for-all, even for these little tiny units. The council's attempt to regulate the units is not the problem. I feel that the state and federal government needs to take a more aggressive step to hold corporations accountable by limiting their numbers in overcrowded cities and taxing them to subsidize the needy in the homes that they already have but can't afford. This might sound like another violation of the democratic process by Queen Roberta, who was not elected to anything. But corporations are not people, contrary to some claims. The citizens of Fairfax are. And so are the future citizens who will live here in these units and who will also want input when they come to live here. It's a bad idea to take away the rights of one group of people to support the needs, the very real needs, of another group of people. So please write the strongest ordinance you can that preserves as many of those rights as possible, especially relative to wildfire codes and density and appeal the state ruling to accommodate exceptions for Fairfax special conditions. I think it's really vital that we stand up for our rights as Fairfax. Thank you.
Thanks, Roberta. Hi, Holly.
Hi, Holly Bragman, Hickory Road. I hate to follow that. That was really good. I agree with pretty much everything she said. The one thing that I noticed on there that sort of concerned me the most was the garages being able to be converted, and I don't know what it said exactly, but that you couldn't require to replace the parking. And so I think we're one of the few people who actually parks in our garage in Fairfax. So, it's filled with stuff. People's garages are filled with stuff. They're not parking in their garages. And I have to say, I think making an affordable living spot in a garage would be a higher use than storing a bunch of stuff, which I think a lot of people are doing. But I'm just wondering if there'd be a way to make a finding to carve out the parking requirement, since we do have very narrow streets and the whole fire, hazard and all of that. I'm imagining some of these places up in the hillside where are they going to park? So anyway, just as an idea, if you could carve out that as a finding, and that's it.
Thank you, Holly. Hi, John.
Hi, John Romatus, Madrone Road. I just want to point out a couple of things I heard. I believe you can build up to 3 on a lot. Is that correct? Up to 3
After
ADUs?
the public, I'm taking notes, and so after public comment,
Okay.
I'll be able to answer and address some of these issues.
Okay, so if you can do 3, the way I'm reading it is that if you have your existing building is non-sprinklered, the ADUs do not have to be sprinklered. So ostensibly, you have now a lot with 4 buildings that are unsprinklered. And I imagine most of the buildings in Fairfax are not sprinklered, just driving around. So I'd like you to consider the fire danger of that. And then this is more to Ms. Colson. There's factory-built housing, and I know that that's under HCD's jurisdiction, and they consider that they do all the inspections and that. So that inspection process, if factory-built housing was allowed, like a unit, we wouldn't even see it. Our building department wouldn't even see it. So I was wondering if that was addressed in the AB 881. That's it.
Okay, thanks, John. So Janet, you're just going to go down and address, Janet? Are you going to go down and address all of these things, just out of order? Okay.
Jane Richardson Mack, Madrone Road. Couple of things. This is really terrifying that the state is telling us what we have to do with our town, because all towns aren't the same, and we have a lot of special issues. They've been mentioned: fire, narrow roads, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My question, I read the same article that Frank did about San Mateo resisting. So I understand there's this urgency business has to be done, otherwise we can't say anything ever, evidently. I'm wondering if we go ahead and do what we need to do just to stay legal, could we then later on object or do whatever we have to do to resist and stand up and maybe join forces with other towns that are resisting, so that Sacramento is not just steamrolling all over everybody all over the state? They're out of line. Somebody has to call them in, and little towns stand up and make big noises, but if all little towns join their little hands, maybe we could all stand up and say, stop it, don't do that. We could work together, hopefully, and try to figure out a way to address more affordable housing. But this just sounds like a recipe for developers to come in, because owners don't have to live there, or real estate flip people come in, buy something, cram a bunch of buildings on it, and go to the bank. So whatever you can do to explore the possibility of how to resist, please do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, hi, Rick.
Hi, Rick Hamer, Fairfax. The first thing I'm going to pick up here from where at the Planning Commission, something that I mentioned, and it's in particular in our general plan on figure S3, page S9 is a landslide risk map. The landslide risk map is overlapped somewhat by the half-mile no parking required area that is will be written into our ordinances, which what I pointed out there was landslide risk is closely associated to narrow roads, whereas we don't identify narrow roads which interfere with egress during a fire event. The landslide risk is about the closest thing we have, and it is an objective standard. What we're seeking is an objective standard that can be applied to put some type of limits on just crazy development. In this particular state code, the definitions are subtly different. It says half a mile walking distance, whereas some of the other new bills say half a mile unobstructed distance. There is a difference. It is subtle. I've mapped out where half a mile unobstructed distance is, and you'd be surprised at how far from Sir Francis Drake's major transit routes that reaches. And it does reach beyond 200 Bolinas and other projects and up into the hills where once you add ADUs, which don't need a parking spot, you know people are going to park up there, and you know what's going to happen is they're going to block the roads in an egress event. So please take a close look at figure S3 in the general plan and see if you can use that objectively. Another thing that I'd like to point out is these ADUs are going to come and proliferate, and we'd really like to make them affordable, but when the town council passed the rent control and laws, which are in chapter 5-55, they did not take the county template or the county model, which included a landlord registry. So in other words, in Fairfax, we have no landlord registry, which means we would not really know where these ADUs are unless we amend chapter 5.55 with a landlord registry so we can track these ADUs and therefore see if they're at market rate or affordable. Incidentally, what Mark said was market rate is around $1,850, whereas affordable for a studio right now, so you've heard it recently, is $1,155 a month. For a one-bedroom, it's $1,318 a month. Those are the current figures for what's considered very low affordable. I can be almost certain that if we are not tracking this, that these new dwellings are going to rent for a whole lot more. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Wendy.
Hi, Wendy. I can tell you from looking for a place to live that there really hasn't been anything for rent in Fairfax at all, and that studios without kitchen anything are over $2,000 a month. So don't fool yourself about what the rents are. And I'm not exaggerating at all. There's a bunch of things I would love to say, but the main thing is if the reason that we're having the ADUs increased is to provide more housing, then there needs to be protections for the renters that are renting that housing, and I don't see that in here at all. So if we don't do that, then I don't see the purpose of this at all. To me, that's the number one issue. If we're supposed to be adding housing and more renters, then those renters need to be protected much better than we do now, much more than we do now. And the parking issue is interesting to me. I noticed that when there's rental units and there's parking required for ADUs, I don't see parking requirements for houses when you buy a house. And honestly, I noticed that there are way more people parking in houses with no requirements whatsoever than renters. And I'm really tired of renters getting blamed for parking issues when it's not just renters with cars. So I know I still don't understand the rules around the laws around that, and I don't understand the not owner occupied part. To me, that's just a setup for more Airbnb, and that's the whole issue that we're having in the first place. Why there's not anything for rent, because everything that used to go for rent for people who are long-term residents is now Airbnb. So those are just some points. Thanks.
Is there, anyone else want to speak on this? Wow. Well, you've given a lot of food for thought here, and a lot of questions have come from that. I know some of the questions Janet was able to write down and address some of the really core confusions around here, clarify some of the basic information, and then we'll bring it back up here and see if we can get more clarification and see how we're going to move forward. So, Janet, would you go ahead and respond?
Okay, I'll try. I wrote down as much as I could about what people were saying, and again, the purpose for doing this, the reason why we're doing an urgency ordinance is so that we can have some Fairfax-specific protections added to what's going to happen anyway on January 1. If we don't do the urgency ordinance, we will be left with the very bare bones state mandated requirements come January 1, and they will be in effect until we do something. So we always have the ability to enact an ordinance, but from the time period starting January 1 until we get something enacted, state standards will be all that apply. And that we will be left with that. There will be no FAR, there will be no lot coverage, there will be no landscaping requirements, there'll be none of that will be allowed. And so that's why we're trying to do this quickly, to get that in place so that we have some of those things, some of those protections that I know you want, starting January 1. And as far as CEQA is concerned, the legislature passed a specific exemption from CEQA for these ADU laws, for their statutory scheme. So ordinances are usually exempt anyway because they're not actually, it's not the actual building, we're not building something, it's just an ordinance that we're putting a law into place. But for this one, there is a slam dunk winner, if you will, and it is that it is statutorily exempt. The legislature passed an exemption. So, so that takes care of that. We have that in our exemption, that's why it is listed. All these things about safety and affordability and landslides and wildfires and all of this sort of thing are part of what the Planning Commission wants to look at in this third ordinance that's coming up. This is going to take some thought. It's going to take some careful review. This particular model ordinance has been discussed with HCD, and that's why it's crafted the way it is, because we did get feedback from them about it. But some of these things, like the wildfire issue, very important issue. I'm not trying to downplay that at all, but that's going to take some conversations to see how far we could possibly go without risking voiding out the entire thing that we're doing, voiding out all the other protections that we have in place. But that is planned for that third ordinance that the Planning Commission is talking about. So landslide, wildfire, affordability, safety issues, all of those things are planned to be discussed and worked on, and hopefully included as much as we possibly can in that third ordinance. Factory-built housing has to meet the building code requirements, right? You're right about the inspections as far as that goes. Sprinklers, you're right again. We have talked about that because if the main house isn't sprinkled, you can't make the JADU sprinkled, you can't make the ADU sprinkled. 3 on a lot, yes, it means the main house, it means a JADU, which is usually attached, and the ADU, separate ADU detached in the backyard. So the 3 units, 3 habitable dwelling units on a lot.
I'm sorry, Janet, but JADUs are always attached.
Yeah.
Okay, just clarify.
Yeah. And so you can, you can have 3 dwelling units on a lot. Now, the thing about the no owner occupancy, what that means is that if somebody owns a property in town and they need to have a bigger house because they now have a larger family or something, and they want to keep that original house as a rental unit, they can do so. They move to their bigger house with their family and whatnot. And at that original house, a smaller house, they can also have a JADU, they can have an ADU, and they don't have to live there. We can't require that they live there. They can rent all 3 units out, and we can't require that they live there. They can go live in their other house, and they can have that as a rental property, as investment income or whatever. But we can't require that they actually live on the property where they also have ADUs. And that was pretty common. An owner occupancy deed restriction was pretty common on a number of ADU ordinances prior to this. And there is a requirement in state statute that there's no short-term rentals, that these cannot be short-term rentals.
But can we talk about the dynamic in our town? Because we don't have any mechanism today as far as a registry or nothing. No vendor solution that has any teeth in it today, is that correct?
And so we have to have a short-term rental ordinance if that's what you want. The state has already put in a requirement here that they have to be rented for longer than 30 days. They cannot be a short-term rental. So that's already in the ordinance, but if the town wants to have something as far as enforcement of short-term rentals is concerned, we'd have to have a short-term rental
So we have it
ordinance.
in the ordinance, but it's not enforceable, is that correct? No, it's in, the 30 days is in the ordinance.
Yeah, the 30 days is in the state statute, okay?
And it's in ours as well,
And it's
obviously.
in this, what we're doing here, because it has to be compliant with state.
Right,
yes.
but we have no way of tracking it or enforcing it.
And so if you want to enforce it and you want to have a tracking system, whatever, you need a short-term rental ordinance.
And did we do a cost-benefit analysis of a solution related to that? And do we have any forecast of what kind of ADU volume we're expecting from this?
We know what we've been getting. With the last batch of basically conversion to non-discretionary review, building permits, et cetera, we jumped from maybe 1 or 2 ADUs a year to 10 per year in the last 2 years. So I would anticipate this trend continuing and possibly accelerating.
Isn't it more like 30 in the last 2 years because we had 29, I thought?
No, it's
Yeah.
20. The count is
20,
actually
okay.
20.
So the growth rate is going to grow with this.
That's the intent.
Yeah.
That's what the
Yeah.
state wants to see, yes. So the other issue is parking, and that ties in a lot to the wildfire issue and to the safety issue. And so the state has been very clear about not allowing us to require replacement parking, and yet we have these other issues connected with narrow roads and fire truck access and all this other kind of stuff. That's all part of what we're going to be looking at through the Planning Commission. One of the things that when you're looking at parking and having a parking problem, unfortunately, because nobody likes this, the solution for that is a resident permit parking program. And that's something that, may come out when we're talking with the Planning Commission about this rewrite of this. So,
Janet, I'm
Yes,
sorry, one more interruption. It does specifically say in the statute that if there is a residential parking permit program and you are not offered one, then you can park wherever you want.
I understand that for ADUs, but we have
I understand the need for other,
Yeah, we already have a parking problem, and so if you want to address it in any fashion,
Okay.
that's the only way right now. But that ties into the wildfire issue, the safety issue, the narrow roads, and all of that sort of issue. And that's what we're going to be looking at to see how far and what we can do about that, because nobody disputes that that's an issue, that that's a problem. Let me see if I had any other questions on here. I'm sorry?
I have a couple things.
Okay, go ahead.
In terms of concerns about trees, the provisions that we included in this ordinance are directed or intended to encourage people to not cut down the 400-foot redwood tree that they have in their yard. Without the local provisions, it would probably be more likely to happen. We would hope that people would not do that as a matter of course, but we are requiring replacement planting with very large trees. So that's something that just says, look, when you're designing the ADU, it's probably a good idea to design it around the existing trees rather than removing them. And in terms of the other items, one of the things that strikes us, and this we heard this at the Planning Commission as well, is the public is obviously concerned, is very educated, is providing that type of local crafting. We were able to put in about a dozen things that are unique to Fairfax, things like creek setbacks, et cetera, already. Window sill heights that have to be a certain distance above the floor if the unit is less than a certain distance from a property line to preserve privacy. Things of that nature that are objective standards, which, as people are aware, has to be, whatever we do has to be an objective standard, easily understandable.
Ben, since you've broached that, could you please tell us what those things are? If you could, do you have a list of what those 10 or 12 things are that you've already
Sure.
brought to the ordinance?
Yes. In terms of, well, the first one, as I mentioned, was windows and privacy. And so the concern is normally with the discretionary review process, one of the things we achieve is that we try to make it so that windows don't look directly into neighbors' backyards. And this is particularly a concern with second-story additions or two-story houses. And so we've got that in this ordinance where if you're less than a certain setback, you have to have a sill height, i.e. a distance from the bottom of the window to the finished floor. That would preserve or ostensibly preserve privacy. Other things, the state is only specifying 4-foot setbacks in the side and the rear. We've added front yard setbacks of 10 feet. So we basically preserve some setbacks all around an ADU structure. Creek setbacks, again, the state makes no accounting for that. But we've included a requirement for either 20 feet or 2 times the bank height. So that, again, provides some recognition of the fact that creeks flood, and you probably don't want to build an ADU right next to it. We also have, if somebody eliminates an ADU, they are required to convert it back. For example, if they convert a garage and then want to eliminate the ADU, I mean, this is, somebody could get an addition that way. Just say, I'm building an ADU, I'm going to put it here. But in any event, if they do convert a garage to an ADU, they have to reconvert it back in order to eliminate the ADU. We do, in terms of septic systems, our codes currently require putting in septic for houses if it's feasible. That's one of the, it's not an absolute prohibition. There are areas in town at the furthermost extent of Cascade Drive where it's not feasible for people to put in septic or connect to the municipal sewer system. But they have to comply with Marin County requirements for septic. So you wouldn't end up with a substandard septic system as a result. We also include such simple things as provisions for floor area ratio and coverage. So both a maximum amount that you can cover a lot with impervious surface, which also relates to drainage, and also the relationship of the total square footage of the structures on the lot to the size of the lot. So one's just pure coverage. The other is how much square footage you have on that lot. We have certain architectural requirements in terms of matching the architecture of the existing building. And let's see, I think that's the majority of what we've done to date. But as I've said, we're hearing loud and clear the concerns about affordability. As we noted, there has to be a study. Interestingly enough, you have to make sure that your affordability provisions don't discourage or render less feasible or infeasible the provision of additional housing. So it's not as simple as simply saying, you have to put in 20% or 50% or 100% affordable. You have to do a study to document that it doesn't adversely impact that. But that certainly was something that we're aware of and we'll be looking at closely. And then the subject of constraints, and this is something that from day one when we were looking at what the state's passed, we're going, wow, the thought of triplexes way up Cascade Canyon with no parking and potentially cars parked on the street in narrow roads. So clearly a what do they call it, clear and present danger. We're looking at the designations for Fairfax's fire hazard. It's not just our locally adopted wildland urban interface zones, but it's the state fire hazard designation. So we will be working with the fire agencies to determine how much leeway we get for those type of considerations. And as Janet pointed out, the parking issue will also be something we will be looking at to make sure that somehow we don't make evacuation issues worse, or we minimize the impact of additional houses with additional vehicles. So those are all great comments we've gotten from the public already, and we look forward to your council's feedback as well.
And there were a couple of other issues I just noted also. The thing about notice, or noticing the neighbors or whatever. It's clear we could not require somebody to notice, to pay for that noticing. If the town wanted to pay for it, then certainly the town could do whatever the town needed to do as far as noticing is concerned. But we can't hold it up, and we can't require that they pay for it. So if somebody wants to come in and get a building permit to do one of the limited ADUs, it would be up to us if we wanted to notice anybody about it, and we'd have to pay for that notice. If there is a flood of requests for building permits on this, I don't know how we would do that with the staff we have, but that's a question you might wish to address with Garrett. The other thing that Larry brought up was the procedure when it goes to HCD for review. So it goes to HCD, we don't know how long it's going to take. Obviously, they have to review every ordinance statewide, so it's going to probably take a while. If there's a complaint, though, from somebody, we've been told informally that they will kick that review up and they will look at it faster. They do write us a letter. If there's something in the ordinance that they question or object to, they write us a letter about that, and we have the opportunity to then discuss it with them. If we're not able to convince them that something we've added in due to local conditions or whatever is necessary and still in conformance with the existing state statutory scheme, then, we can agree to disagree, at which point they will refer us over to the AG's office, and, or we can fix it. We can change it. We can modify it. The question, though, becomes, if we modified something, let's say we hear from them about something in our ordinance that they don't care for in May, and we do some back and forth, and they finally say, no, we don't like it, and you're going to have to fix it, or we're going to send you off to the AG, Attorney General, for enforcement. So then we say, okay, we'll fix it. We'll take an ordinance to the council, and we'll let the council decide, if they want to fix it. And let's say the council does enact that ordinance. The question that we have is, does that mean that your ordinance was non-compliant from January 1 to the date you fixed the thing that HCD didn't like? Remember, there's no severability here, and so it's an all or nothing approach. It's either totally compliant, or there's one little thing that makes it not, and the whole thing is gone. And so what is of concern is that time period from January 1 to whenever we fix something HCD doesn't like. So I don't know that that's really a panacea that's going to solve everything, right? I think there's a question there about what happens to all the ones that have come in before that. So anyway, that's my thought.
Okay, any other questions from council? Barbara?
Yeah, just one question. So I think I've read through this. I asked for the language on the incentive, and with that one change, I'm fine with it. Understanding the urgency, but one question I have is this third ordinance that's being worked on by the Planning Commission, or will be worked on. Given the urgency of having objective development standards in place by January 1, I'm not sure the relevance of another ordinance that would take effect, I don't know, a couple months from now, if we add more objective development standards after January 1. How does that work?
Well, it would apply to anything that came in after that point in time.
Okay, so that would be fine.
Yeah.
so we could further refine this. And
Yes.
one of the things I would add to your PowerPoint, if you were to do this somewhere else, is the issue of no short-term rentals.
Okay.
To me, I think that I read through all the bills, and to me, that was a really, I mean, there's a lot about these bills that I'm not happy with, but I thought that was a very forward-thinking thing to put in. And the way I understand it, that doesn't have a sunset.
No, it doesn't. The only thing that sunsets here is the owner occupancy deed
Okay,
restriction.
right.
We're not allowed to require somebody live in one of the units on the property, the owner of the property live there until 2025.
Okay, thank you.
Just for a general frame for this discussion, I was wondering, is the urgency ordinance as presented to us tonight changeable in any way and then able to be approved tonight?
Yes, you can. I caution you that, we need to keep this. This has been vetted and reviewed, and we're fairly comfortable with the added provisions that we've added in here. The underlying, model template ordinance is fine. If we start tinkering with that, we run the risk of inserting something that would make it non-compliant. And, it's always best to be able to think about it, to vet it, to look at it, to research it, to contact HCD, to have some work done on it before you start adding things in. So, for example, all these issues about the landslides, the wildfires, the parking, the affordability, the safety issues, all these things are being looked at and will be looked at, but they're not something that we're prepared to add in tonight, because we don't have language for that. We couldn't craft language for that, and it hasn't been vetted. We haven't talked to HCD. We would be I would recommend that you not do it, because I think you might be injecting something that would render the whole thing non-compliant with state statute and therefore null and void.
So if we wanted to revisit the short-term rental part, because I was thinking it would be good to actually add a max number of days per year, not just no shorter than 30 days, that could come later.
Yes,
That's not an imminent threat to what we're trying to do. Yeah.
Right, that's
I got
part
it.
of that revisiting that we're doing, all these issues. I'm not saying that all of them could necessarily go in, but all of them certainly will be looked at. And that's where the council should make recommendations to the Planning Commission for things to look at.
Okay. Anyone else on council want to ask questions? John?
Yeah, I've got a number of them. Yeah, thanks for this comprehensive look at it. I mean, it's helpful for the public and council too. Let me see. So in regards to the septic, does the county environmental health, I think is what their septic tank regulating thing, how much do they respect our ordinances in terms of new construction being, well, I mean, basically, there's a lot of areas, basically, if it's uphill, a sewer line is physically possible, even though it might be really expensive. And in fact, that requirement has done that. But does environmental health respect our ordinances, or do they basically hold it in high regard? And in that, or are we going to get other septic things?
I believe that the county's role is more involved with if there's going to be a septic system. They're making sure that it's built to standards so that we don't have a problem with surfacing effluent or things like that, distance to water table, those type of things. I believe the discussion about the distance to an existing municipal line and whether that's feasible or not is left to the jurisdiction of the town. It doesn't happen very often, but we would probably have to do more research to really get a definitive answer.
It would be our call anyway.
I believe so.
Yeah. Okay. All right, and I guess the other questions I think are more towards you, Janet. But if we have multiple ordinances, for instance, we have this emergency ordinance that we're considering tonight, and right after that we have a duplicate of that to back it up. And ordinarily our emergency ordinances have a short duration just because they are for an emergency kind of situation, and then they get replaced by the other one, which is basically the same thing. So now we're going to talk about a third one. And is it possible for those both to be in place, and one is just stronger than the other, or does the second one have to replace the first?
That's what happens. So no, it's legislation on the same topic. So you have an urgency ordinance that's in effect until your regular ordinance, your backup regular ordinance comes in, and then it
that's
replaces
understood.
that. And that's why they're identical. And then if you have yet another revision, you'd be revising your backup regular ordinance. And you'd have another revision come in, it would replace it in its entirety. And so then you wanted to maybe say, continue to work on it and revise it. And next year, you have another one that comes in. And you can amend an ordinance as many times as you want to, but only one is in effect at any point in time. And so it's simply a timing issue.
But you get what I'm talking about. It's basically a backstop for the,
Yeah, there is no backstop. That's what's unusual about the state legislation, is they're saying you can't have certain provisions and then maybe you want to add things that maybe hold up or not. What they're saying is no, if any portion of that ordinance is declared invalid, then none of your local regulations apply.
So we are running the risk of knocking out our ordinance as we tighten it up.
Let me make sure that I understand what you're asking, because we have this template that is compliant with state statute, and we've added in things that are objective development standards, and that we believe, in conversation with HCD and in conversation with all the attorneys who've been working on this, we believe those would be upheld and that would still make that ordinance compliant with state statute. If you then continue adding in and amending the ordinance, and you add in even one thing, even just one little thing that is deemed to be not compliant with the state statutory scheme, that whole ordinance fails. The whole thing falls. It just fails.
And we can't go back to the earlier one?
No, you will be subject to state until you fix it or change it or make it, again, a compliant ordinance.
So we could re-adopt the earlier one?
If you re-adopt it with that one thing that's deemed to be non-compliant, then you're compliant. But remember that takes time to do that. Now,
Sure,
we
we're
could
out
look
3
at,
months or whatever
we
it
could
is.
look at doing it again, another urgency, potentially, but still, there's going to be some window of time from when we know a provision is not compliant to when we can get something else in place. So you've got a gap. You'll have a gap. But that's the risk, because normally how in an ordinance we have a severability clause, and we say if any provision of this ordinance is deemed to be illegal, unconstitutional, whatever, then it falls out, but the rest of the ordinance stands, it holds. The state is not allowing us to do that this time. So, it's all or nothing. It's one little thing can make the whole house of cards fall.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks for that. And I guess this landslide risk map as a strategy, which was brought up by one of our constituents here, I think is a pretty interesting strategy, and I hope that has merit, and we will.
It's on the list, yes.
Oh, good. And San Mateo County has a lot of these jobs. I mean, that's really the source of a lot of this overheated economy that we've got here.
I spoke with Frank about this, the San Mateo case that he's talking about. I spoke with Frank about this before the meeting, and I think what this probably is, first off, it's a Superior Court case, so it's not reported, so it's not precedent, and I can't find it unless I'll call the city attorney in San Mateo and see if I can find out what this is about. But what Frank said was that the city of San Mateo was sued by a developer, and so I suspect it's under the Housing Accountability Act. I think it was probably a density issue under the Housing Accountability Act, but and the town supposedly, according to Frank, prevailed. I will find out about that, but I think he's using that, and I don't mean to speak for him, but from what I heard him say, and what I heard him say when he spoke with me earlier, was that he's using that as an example of some cities do challenge the state. And so I do think, though, this is a little bit, it's distinguishable in that it was probably a developer who sued the town, and then it went to court over enforcement of the Housing Accountability Act. Many developers want to use that and think that they can design a project that meets the requirements of that. It's kind of hard to meet, actually. And so there have been, and I've been subject to having developers' attorneys tell me, well, we can do this and we can do that and we can do the other. And I disagree with those assertions. And so I think that, yes, these cases under the Housing Accountability Act are ripe to be adjudicated. If people really want to push it and want to take it that far, you can definitely get sued over that.
Yeah, I mean, it would certainly be worthwhile, I think, to find out exactly what's going on with those, and I can't imagine that there won't be other jurisdictions that are also thinking about this, and maybe there's, filing an amicus brief or something like that to kind of ride the coattails of this.
Right. I don't think it was
way.
definitely under the ADU statutes. This is brand new, so there hasn't been any litigation yet. It's not even in effect yet. It's not in effect until January 1st.
Sure.
And so, but, after January 1st, it will be interesting to see what happens as far as jurisdictions that either disagree with it and just simply don't want to do it and try to challenge. More likely than not, what will happen, though, is that HCD will find somebody's ordinance to be non-compliant, and they will be refusing to fix it the way HCD wants. And so HCD will send it to the AG's office, and we'll get the first cases there from enforcement from the AG. And so that's when we'll see how this works. A lot of this is unknown until we get judicial opinions, obviously, but the statute is pretty clear. The language in it is pretty clear. And my goal in providing advice to you is to try to make sure that you don't become the test case.
Yeah. I could see that, we've got a rainy day fund, but it's, it's raining right now, and, we need that for rain too. I guess that wraps up our questions right now.
Anyone else with particular questions?
I have a question, bear with me because I'm new. So just what is your thoughts as far as, it sounds like you've been consulting HCD on the list of, you referred to this model you've been working with. And if you had to guess, I'm concerned about how long this third ordinance is going to take to enact. I'm hoping it doesn't take us a year to get there. That's what I'm concerned about. And so, if you had to guess, what are we looking at?
Well, the Planning Commission, one of the things that came out of the Planning Commission meeting was they were as unhappy, not satisfied as everybody is about this, and they wanted to keep looking at it. So that's actively something that is happening now. We're collecting information and trying to get information to take back to them to have them look at this, look at these issues. And, it's going to take probably a couple of meetings at least in planning.
It's a lot. There's a lot here.
The challenge with the fire is that you're talking about the purview of other agencies and how that wraps into various maps or designations. Ultimately, maybe the question is, how many options are there to fix this? I know that there have been discussions at the state level about the advisability of continuing to develop in higher fire-prone areas, and that I think there was even some discussion about a Senate bill that was due to go through last year that they held off on. But I think it's a very valid question. Is yes, we know we need housing desperately, but should we be putting them in critical fire hazard areas?
But I think the question Stephanie asked was, how long do we think it'll take to get to us? And my expectation is, you're not going to talk about it tomorrow night because you were waiting for direction, but I would think 2 meetings of the Planning Commission, so that would be January, February, and then hopefully get to us in March. Because I don't think we want to dither about this too long.
You've got the affordability piece, you have the public safety piece. I haven't gotten to speaking for the trees piece, but I want to give some feedback on that piece. There's a lot, and I'm wondering if you need to have some special meetings scheduled, honestly, because
Well, one other aspect is, as Janet mentioned, if we're going to be taking changes that are sort of pushing the boundaries that nobody else has really done this, we don't even have the law in effect at this time with regards to fire and not building in high fire hazard areas. We're probably going to need to take that to HCD and say, what do you think? So that in and of itself is going to add a period of time. So I think an expectation that it's going to be a couple months may not be realistic. I think we're probably looking at late spring, maybe summer.
Bruce.
Well, that's, I won't repeat any things that have been said, but I certainly, one of the key issues with this, coming back to just the overall big view of it, is that affordability, it doesn't seem to be really a part of what's coming out of the state. They're just talking about housing, just making sure that plenty of housing gets built, but how affordable it is doesn't seem to be a factor. So any way that we can try to address that, it's tough, but that would seem to be a key issue.
I will say that definitely more housing is what the state legislature is after, and market will start to control if you have a lot of housing being put out there.
Well, in theory, if there was lots and 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 lots of housing, then it could become cheap, yeah.
It could become more affordable, but also keep in mind, these are not large.
We could have a ways to go on that.
These are smaller units, and so, and I understand that we had testimony as far as the current price for smaller units in Fairfax. It's pretty shocking, but I think that we're certainly going to be looking at some of the affordability questions, and that's something that'll be coming back here, but they are smaller, and if there are a number of them being built, and they all hit the market at the same time, you know what supply and demand does. But
I think I would say something. My house isn't even 1,000 square feet, so when you talk about the limits of these, I think a one-bedroom is what, 800, 850, 800,
yeah.
And a two-bedroom is 1,000.
1,000.
That's bigger than where I live now, and I think so. I think in the old days, granny units were more like 600 square feet, and so the idea was they were smaller and they would be more affordable, but now they can be the size of a small house. So I think, you know, one thing to definitely add to the list is look at that affordability issue so we can try to help people in Fairfax where the rents have really gotten really high.
So Bruce, you had a few more things?
I'm sure this is already, you're already thinking about this, but just to put in my 2 cents on it, I do like the idea of looking at the landslide maps as a possible proxy, but what we're really looking for is fire risk. And so given that some studies have been done about fire risk, and Fairfax was, as Mr. Egger said, one of the higher fire risk zones, maybe those studies could be used as a way to get more directly at an objective standard for where to try to prevent too many more cars being parked and impeding evacuation, too many more people that need to be evacuated. But that's, I know that's difficult, and I know that's already on your list. The notion of somehow dealing with short-term rentals in terms of our ability to enforce them or monitor them is probably going to have to come back to us at some point, because I know we explored it a couple of years ago, and to my mind it was kind of surprising what the public input was the one night that we just put it on the agenda to discuss it. But it's definitely an issue, and it's definitely one of the things that's driving rents up and driving the supply of small rentals down in Fairfax is the short-term rentals. And so I think we're going to have to try to get a handle on that somehow. Despite the fact that I know people who have houses here support their ability to have a house here by having a short-term or by having short-term rentals, but it's we don't have any way of even knowing how many there are, and that's a little crazy. And finally, there was, not tonight, but by email, we got one suggestion to really seriously consider whether there's any way that we can have, if we're going to be encouraging ADUs, allow the ability for tiny homes that are even mobile tiny homes being permitted in some way. That's something that's come up in the past from people in public input, that there's been, what I've gauged anyway, to be a fair amount of support for the concept of tiny homes. And so if there's any way we can fit that in the Planning Commission's deliberations.
Can I piggyback on that real quick?
Yeah.
So that was a question. When would that be a good time? When would it be a good time to contemplate that? Because there's been talk, and I know at the Planning Commission, Mimi mentioned yurts and mentioned lots of ways to start being creative about solutions for these smaller units. That I know that would not come at this point, but that's been on our council goals for years. So am I correct? This wouldn't have a home in this particular legislation, but it could be written down to consider if it would assist.
Well, are you talking about tiny homes just in general?
No, these are governed, as alluded to by an audience member, these are mobile homes that are governed by HCD. And they are discussed in our general plan, and I know there's been some interest by the town. Probably when we get into the housing element, which we will be for the next 2 years, further discussion about that. I think one of the challenges is land availability. I mean, potentially you could create pads on people's lots and make sure they're hooked up to septic, but it's an in-depth discussion that really goes beyond what we're trying to do tonight.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it just keeps going down the river, but hopefully we'll get there. Anyway, so you want to make a motion? Did anyone have any other comments or anything before we move forward into the motion department? Because
well, yeah, I think that I'm certainly hearing what you're saying as far as the legal position being that it's the safest thing for us to do tonight to pretty much do these ordinances as they're before us so that we keep in compliance, and we do maintain our compliance first with the urgency ordinance and then with the more permanent ordinance that might pass possibly the next meeting. But then we all agree that we're moving forward through the Planning Commission and then back to us with a larger discussion of what we might do to challenge some of these things a little more and tailor them better to Fairfax's conditions.
Right, it gives us the time to be able to do that. It keeps us in compliance from January 1 on until we get that done. And that's really critically important because this is going into effect across the state, and I know that there's been a lot of interest in a number of different jurisdictions, and it's bringing out people who are homeowners who've wanted to do this but have been sort of hesitant to try to approach it because they thought they had to go through hearings and they thought it cost a lot of money, and now they're seeing that maybe it doesn't. And so I suspect we're going to get some applications right away.
On these housing. I had a question. So my largest concern in all of this is fire. And I heard conflicting things when the Planning Commission was considering this. And by the way, thank you to the Planning Commission 5 hours later for absolutely picking apart every single detail of this. I learned a tremendous amount. If you're listening out there, wow, yeah, huge service to this town. In terms of fire, the map, CAL FIRE does not have us in a high fire threat zone at this time. I'm not sure that makes any sense at all, and not what I know from CAL FIRE.
What I Immediately after that meeting, we got together with our GIS consultant and we began to pick apart that map. And what we found was the map that we were provided by the county was misleading at best, that when we actually looked at fire hazard zones, virtually all of Fairfax, I'm talking about 90% plus, is in a state designated high fire hazard zone. So we've clarified that, and we're also reviewing the potential applicability of that for various statutes, and hope to get some answers for that. The question about how we deal with fire with this ADU, again, that's a complicated question, and we're working on it.
I just want to make sure that as we move forward, because as you guys were talking about, this is a huge amount of work to go into a third ordinance, but vital. There are probably 15 points that I don't feel comfortable unless we really, really do the deep dive on this. But, you know, I want to make sure that we are exploring every possibility that we might have exemptions from some of this through either the landslide map, which I know we are working on, and the fire map. So there's a lot of work to be done in, you know, creating this third ordinance, but there's also a lot of work to be done to make sure that we're not missing something, that we aren't necessarily as subject to this as we may think we are. And I know this is not in any way questioning the work that you have all done, but
No,
I've heard some things that are very concerning and
Oh, yeah, there are. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we're going to continue to look at it and continue. The Planning Commission wants to continue to work on it. I mean, that was the thing they said to us at the end of the meeting, was we want to continue to work on this right now. We'll go ahead and we'll put these ordinances, you know, pass them on to with our positive recommendation to the council, because we think they should be enacted, but we'll continue to work on this, and we'll be sending something else to the council. And so these are all very complex but very important questions that need to be thoroughly looked at.
Okay, so question process before we move forward is, so we'll entertain a motion, it sounds like Barbara has, but when we get to the next item, would that be the opportunity to make our recommendations or to request things to be considered by the Planning Commission? That would be a better time for that than doing this now.
I think I've heard a lot already.
Right.
So we've taken a lot of notes, and we've already have things that are going back to commission from council. But certainly, you can do that at the second one, too.
So I thank you, Janet. I'd like to entertain a
So
motion.
I'd like to make a motion. Just one thing I would say is, having sat on the Planning Commission, this time of year, there's not a lot of projects coming in, so I think the deep dive by the Planning Commission should happen as soon as possible, so that we're not getting into spring where there's a lot of projects coming in. They don't really have the time to really look at this. So my motion would be introduce and adopt an urgency ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Fairfax, amending 17.048 of the Fairfax Town Code relating to residential accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units, and determining the ordinance to be exempt from CEQA, with the supplement that was provided on the dais and I'm sure out there on the safe, with one change that said this incentive program will expire on 11/1/2027.
Yes, and this is a read by title only also.
Second.
Okay. All right, so we have a motion, Kohler, and a second read. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. So the motion carries. Thank you. So, moving right along, item number 3 on the agenda is a similar thing, to introduce and read by title only an ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Fairfax, amending Chapter 17.048 of the Fairfax Town Code relating to accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units, and determining the ordinance to be exempt from CEQA. Janet,
Yes, so again, this is the exact same thing we just did, except it's not an urgency, it's the backup regular ordinance. And this is an introduction only, it doesn't go into effect, it comes back to you in January for a second reading. And then if you adopted it, introduction is the first reading, adoption is the second reading. And so you'll see those terms used interchangeably, first reading, second reading, introduction, adoption. If it is adopted in January, it takes 30 days for it to become effective, but it is identical to the ordinance you just passed. And we also want to add in the supplement here as well. So the changes that were made and to the fee section, and we are going to change the date on it. It will expire 12/31/27.
So the date would be 11/1/2027. The date that you have there is incorrect. It was 10 years. So,
I know, I changed it to just give it an end date. So it's
11/1/2027.
Okay. So I'm happy to answer any questions about this.
Great.
It's more of a procedural thing since the ordinances are exactly the same.
Okay,
I guess can I make a comment?
Please.
I would feel a heck of a lot better voting on this if I had some commitment on a plan, on a strategic plan and a timeline for the permanent ordinance. I know we just talked about that, but I'm very uncomfortable with the game plan right now and how long it's going to take.
Well, I can understand that, but I also want to...
I know they can't tell me it's going to be ready June 1, but
But I'll just, following up on what Renee said, that my thanks to the Planning Commission, and it's just, we have over the last year, more than a year, we have seen the Planning Commission working very, very hard, and it's amazing what the Planning Commission has been going through. Big topics, the cannabis topic, and these things have been huge, and they've been
right, and the cannabis topic had 23 meetings, right? Right.
Yeah.
So what I was suggesting is that perhaps we have a special meeting.
Well, I don't think this will be 23 meetings, but it's just some compassion for the people on the Planning Commission for having to, that it's going to take a few months to go through this in detail, and it's probably worth looking in the detail. But
yeah, this was a question time.
Yeah, this is.
And then we have to go to public, and then we come back to deliberate.
Yeah.
So did you have a question?
I just wanted, as a counterpoint to putting a real strong timeline on it, considering that we need the depth of studying it.
Thank you, Bruce. I watched the 5-hour November 21st meeting, and I have the utmost respect for all the commissioners, and I hear you. I'm not asking for a 2-month turnaround. That's not at all what I'm asking for. And what I'm asking for is for a more defined plan, and so if I could have just a better understanding what the plan is, and if that could we commit to some special meetings where the public could give input, or where this group could give more specific feedback, because I'm not feeling like I really understanding what the game plan is. That's what I'm.
Okay, so if you don't mind holding, because I hear you, and we'll make sure that becomes part of our deliberation, but I'd like to go out to the public, and that might help us formulate a clearer path forward. I hear you. Frank.
Frank Ager, Meadoway, speaking for Save Fairfax. I urge you to amend this backup ordinance tonight. The town attorney has stated you may be subject to an attorney general turn-in if you do not adopt. You're actually covered right now because you've adopted the urgency ordinance. So the hurry to adopt this ordinance is really not that necessary. Fairfax adopted a ban on use of pesticides on the commons and a neighbor notification law back around 2000, 2001. The state of California and the state attorney general threatened Fairfax with a lawsuit if we did not rescind Fairfax's ban on the pesticides on the commons and neighbor notification law. The state said cities and counties could not regulate pesticides. In response, the Sebastopol and Fairfax town attorneys and along with Jack Silver, a well-known North Bay environmental lawyer, came to Fairfax's defense. And in the end, the state backed down and agreed that the Fairfax ordinance could stand, that we had the authority to regulate pesticides on the commons. If Fairfax had never challenged that state law, we would not have a pesticide ban on the commons on the books right now. That's just an example of what Fairfax has done, challenging state laws. I'll pick up where I left off. The new ordinance should not allow new ADUs to be constructed after January 1st, 2020 that are located in the wildland urban interface zones until such time as the Fairfax Police Department and Ross Valley Fire Department have determined evacuation routes are sufficient in roadway clearance and width to allow timely evacuations. Another finding, Fairfax has never inventoried her second units. Around the year 2000, it was estimated there were 300 second units in town, some legal, some not. In the past 20 years, probably another 100 second units have been added. The state of California wants ADUs approved. Fairfax probably has more second units than most Marin cities and towns. Fairfax needs an inventory to be able to show the state of California just how many we have. The ordinance should have a whereas that recognizes Fairfax's historical approval of second units starting with the 1973 zoning ordinance, which included the combination zone. Another finding, the ADU ordinance says all rentals should be no less than 30 days. Since Fairfax does not regulate short-term rentals, there is no way to enforce that 30-day condition. Today's estimates, looking at VRBO, HomeAway, Flipkey, and Airbnb sites, indicate as many as 200 short-term rentals are currently being advertised on various sites. Fairfax actually requires short-term rentals to pay transit occupancy tax, but only collects it from the Fairfax Inn, not any of the short-term rentals. And since Fairfax does not regulate short-term rentals, we have no idea how many are currently available. And with many of the short-term rentals taking affordable housing stock off the market, Fairfax receives no transit occupancy tax for Airbnb type rentals in town. And just I quoted the chapter 3.32 hotel users tax, the definitions. On the definition of a hotel, any structure or portion of any structure which is occupied or intended or designated for occupancy by hotel users for dwelling, lodging, or sleeping purposes, and includes any hotel inn, bed and breakfast inn, tourist home or house, motel, mobile home, or other lodging. Right now, Fairfax has the authority to at least collect the tax on short-term rentals. So Fairfax needs to initiate the regulation of short-term rentals in conjunction with the new ADU ordinance and state specifically in the ordinance that no ADU or JADU approved after January 1st, 2020 shall be rented short-term unless approved by the town of Fairfax. Another finding, the purpose of California ADU and JADU laws is to increase the housing stock. Well, number 5, require any ADU constructed after January 2020 to be conditioned on an approved rent control ordinance and complying with it. Finding, waiving parking requirements in a garage or carport is converted to an ADU will just put more cars on a congested narrow roads, creating an evacuation nightmare. Require off-street parking for new ADUs in the hill areas, currently congested neighborhoods in the flats and in the WUI zone. Another finding, Fairfax has protected homes from wildland fire by requiring reasonable setbacks. Coffee Park in Santa Rosa had the best rating for defense in a wildland fire, yet most of it burned house to house in the 2017 Tums fire because of close proximity of structures. Reducing setbacks to 4 feet on the sides and rear will add to the fire risk in neighborhoods. Make an exception to the state setback requirements in WUI zones and keep current Fairfax setbacks. The very recent San Mateo County Superior Court decision by Judge George Merrim stated the state of California cannot force certain types of zoning for housing mandates on charter cities. The judge said a charter city has constitutionally protected control over local matters. Fairfax has historically challenged state laws from pesticides to zoning when Fairfax believed it was in Fairfax's best interest to challenge certain laws and requirements. One state law Fairfax challenged was a general law city could not zone by initiative. That was an option for charter cities only. Fairfax passed a zoning initiative in 1972 and was sued.
Frank,
I'm going to try to wrap this is real quick.
Okay.
A Marin County Superior Court decision against Fairfax's 1972 zoning ordinance cited the state law that allowed only charter cities to zone by initiative. Fairfax appealed that decision to the First District Court of Appeals. The First District reversed the lower court, stating Fairfax, a general law city, had the same rights as a charter city on zoning matters. The plaintiff appealed to the California Supreme Court, and the California Supreme Court reviewed the First District decision and allowed First District Court decision to stand. The case is Friedman versus Fairfax. Fairfax set new case law statewide, stating general law cities had the same right as charter cities on certain zoning matters. Determine what cities are not capitulating to the myriad of new state housing one-size-fits-all laws. Contact like-minded mayors and council members to see how they are challenging new state laws. There are 482 cities in California, and there must be a number of them that
Frank,
will not
are
be
you almost
rolling
there?
over to the opportunity. Now is the opportunity to form a consortium of small, medium-sized towns to protect cities and towns from urbanization and overdevelopment. Thank you.
I will look forward to reading that. Thank you for providing it. Okay, next, Richard.
Richard Applebaum, Woodland Road. So if I think I've followed things tonight, you've already just voted in something, the urgency ordinance, and this is just a mirror of that will give us extended time, and it sounds like everybody I'm hearing in the room, and council and staff and everybody, there's many concerns and much work to be done with Planning Commission and coming back here. I wish some of the things that Frank was saying could be in place by Jan 1 could be, but what's in Jan 1 now is our urgency ordinance. So from a procedural standpoint, I would encourage you to not get into a long further debate because we just did it and just approve the second one as well. And then we have the extended time. We all agree that we're going to work on the later one that's going to replace it. And two things that I heard that I think are important. So Mayor, I think I heard you say, yeah, there might be like 15 things we want to get in here, and there's really important stuff, and fire, and the cars, and affordability, and all these things, which I think many of us, if not all of us, really care about. But I also heard the phrase, we don't want to be the test case. And so we're not going to be the test case on Jan 1. We have our urgency. Maybe we're not going to be the first town, but to Frank's sort of underlying theme, which is that Fairfax has fought back against state things, and to Roberta's comments earlier in the evening about more and more things are coming down that are just taking away local control, and I think we really value that aspect of our life here in Fairfax and how we govern. So what I would say as a seed thought for everyone is that when we reach that point in time that you've got the 15 things and you start to filter it through, and we find out that, guess what, you're not going to stay in compliance. We're not going to like 9 of the 15 things, or we're not going to like any of the 15 things, or whatever it is. At that moment, we should be having a different conversation about whether we do want to become a test case, and not just say, well, too bad for us. So that's what I have to say. I have some interesting thoughts about parking. I'm not going to talk about them tonight. I'm going to save them for next meeting. And thank you. So I encourage you to just vote this thing through, and let's keep moving.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Mark Valdominga. I just wanted to reiterate something Frank had said. He said that there was a study how Fairfax is one of the worst, 13th worst place in California for wildfire potentiality and disaster. I mean, that sounds pretty objective to me. Why wouldn't it be objective to the state?
Okay, thank you. Wendy, Rick.
Rick Hamer. I can totally get behind what Mr. Egger said. I think that Fairfax is the type of town to push back at the state, and I can't see the Attorney General pushing back at Fairfax, and very successfully, when talking about the wildlife-urban interface and other safety and egress issues. And it's too late once these structures are up. That means between January 1 and whenever the special meetings all get accomplished in March, April, whenever it is, how many new structures are going to be up that are going to be at risk for laddering fires out of control? So I really, I appreciate what Mr. Egger said, and I think you should too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Wendy. I actually meant to ask about the tiny home issue too when I spoke, and I sat down and realized I forgot to ask that part. So it sounds like the tiny homes are not considered part of this at all, which is a shame. And yeah, I would encourage that to be looked at in all of this. And I'm curious if this means that all the already illegal units in Fairfax would now be considered legal, is another question I have. And then I'm also curious, I don't know all the details, so I'm curious, one thing that didn't come up in any of the questions or anybody speaking is, I know that like kitchen facilities are an issue with ADUs, and I don't know how that fit. What are the laws around the kitchen facilities with this new law? Thanks. And I also fire and affordability need to be the #1 priorities addressed. And to me, this is useless if they're still totally unaffordable to everybody. We've already lost a lot of renters in this town, including me.
All right. Thank you, Wendy. Hi, Deb.
Hi, Deborah Benson, Cascade Drive. I think it's a nice goal to consider making it necessary for these to be affordable, but I think it's kind of a pipe dream. I think the same reason that it's not affordable for developers to build a whole set of affordable housing is it's the same reason that a homeowner isn't going to spend $50,000 to $100,000 on an ADU in order to rent it for less than market rate. So that's too bad, but I think it's unrealistic to think that these could be affordable and to place that restriction on it.
Thank you. So any other public comment? All right, bringing it back up here. Was that a hearing? Oh, sorry. So I did open the public hearing, but I called a public comment. So now I'm closing the public hearing. Thank you, Barbara. I have a question. Actually, could you address the questions, the specific ones that you put down that may be different than the others?
So when I said that I don't think you want to be a test case, and our advice is to provide you with a recommendation that keeps you from being the test case. I'm speaking about this first part of it. Clearly, for any third ordinance that's coming forward, there's going to be a lot of issues that we're going to have to decide on, and it's going to be a risk assessment. And so what we do is we don't make that decision for you. We lay out the pros and cons, and then you make that decision. We may provide you with a recommendation, but obviously that sort of risk assessment is left to the council to decide. What about current illegal ADUs? They can be legalized fairly easily if they meet the requirements in the ordinance. You can come in, you can get pull a building permit, have an inspection, and see what you need to fix, and fix it, bring it up to standards, and they can be legalized very quickly. And remember that even ones that are non-conforming can still be legalized very quickly. So I think that's, the state has created its own incentive program, as I've mentioned before. This is a huge incentive to property owners who have illegal accessory dwelling units to legalize them and to bring them in and get them.
But you're still dealing with code issues. I mean, they have to meet code. That's the expensive part.
They have 5 years to meet building codes.
Under the new state statute.
Okay.
So it's intended to create housing stock. It's intended to bring in the illegals, to make them legal. It's intended to produce more housing. Yes, the issues connected with wildfire and parking and narrow roads and safety hazards, safety issues, are ones that there is some language in this new statutory scheme to deal with safety issues, but those are the things we're going to be exploring and trying to craft something that addresses the issues, if at all possible, in a way that still maintains the compliance with the statutory scheme set out by the state.
Okay, question.
Can you
Bruce.
also respond to the question about the kitchen that Wendy raised?
That's in the
Yeah,
statute.
I don't know how granular you want us to get at this meeting, but we do.
I think she asked, does it include a kitchen? And I think I would just say, what does it include as the kitchen? There's something in here, but I'm not sure that I totally understand it.
It does include a kitchen, and there are standards for those kitchens in terms of, I believe, counter space.
Well, it says in the, an
Definition.
efficiency kitchen means a kitchen that includes each of the following: a cooking facility with appliances, a food preparation counter or counters that total at least 15 square feet in area, food storage cabinets that total at least 30 square feet of shelf space. And that's for an accessory dwelling unit. I'm not sure what it says for the junior unit. It has... It includes an efficiency kitchen as defined above. So
Yes.
it sounds like, to me, in the old days, an ADU would have something more like a real kitchen. It sounds like, based on what I'm reading here, maybe I totally don't understand it, that an ADU can have something more like a JADU kitchen, which is not like my kitchen. I mean, efficiency kitchens, so the old JDUs where you could have a microwave and a little mini fridge and a sink. I'm not sure that it's the same thing, this definition of efficiency kitchen, what that is. It's not clear to me what that means, but it sounds like it's a little bigger than a JADU, old JADU kitchen, but it's not necessarily a full kitchen.
Right.
Yeah, what you're seeing, you're exactly right, that the trend is towards saying you can have less and less and still have it qualify as an ADU kitchen. So.
Okay, so there's some sort of kitchen, but it may not be as extensive as what you would see in a single-family home.
And as a practical matter, those are the type of things that cost more money. So assuming that there is ever going to be some affordability component, if people are spending less money on things like kitchens, which tend to drive up costs, potentially that would rent for less money.
Bruce, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm puzzled about something. So in both of these ordinances, the urgency and the one we're considering now, in page 5, it says no ADU or JADU may be rented for a term shorter than 30 days. So, and that comes from state law, right? That wasn't our addition. That was one of the things that
Correct.
was required.
Correct.
Now, with this passed, what does that do to ADUs or JADUs that exist in town now that are being used as short-term rentals?
And these provisions apply to newly created ADUs and JADUs.
So the provisions in this ordinance, even though it says no ADU, it really means no ADU
one
that's,
created, yes,
that's
after this.
approved per this
Yes,
process.
yes.
But it doesn't retroactively affect other ones.
For example, in some jurisdictions, there is a requirement for the deed restriction for the owner occupancy. And we've had the question of now, as of January 1 anyway, you can't require that. But let's say you're in a jurisdiction that did require that prior.
You already have those.
And you already have deed
Yeah.
restrictions on properties that have ADUs.
Yeah.
This doesn't impact those. So those deed restrictions still stay in place unless the governing body decides to allow them to be removed. And this restriction on the governing body for placing new deed restrictions on owner occupancy is only going to go for 5 years. So conceivably, you could have a situation where you had ADUs created prior to this that have deed restrictions for owner occupancy, a period of 5 years where everyone created wasn't deed restricted for owner occupancy, and then again, starting in 2025, you could have deed restrictions for owner occupancy again. So it is a trial, temporary type of provision that only goes for 5 years. This is not retroactive. It doesn't cover anything that's already constructed out there.
Thank you.
I had one question or comment before I think we're ready to move forward, because we have another big item. And that is, if you look at the ordinances, the urgency versus the regular, in the whereases, in the urgency ordinance, it covers everything that the Planning Commission comprehensively talked about fire safety, flooding, earthquake, safety, soil stability, landslide, all of those things, is evacuation. And in the whereases, in the permanent, it does not. In that whereas, it doesn't include it. Is there something I'm misunderstanding?
No, we can add that in. It's intended to be identical.
Yeah, it's not.
Okay. That's on page, the very first page.
That's on the very first page of the
Yeah.
ordinance.
The third one from the bottom.
It's
right?
attachment A in the regular ordinance. Okay, so I'm ready to ask if we're ready to move forward with this, if anyone would like to make a motion.
I'd like to
John?
make a couple quick comments, however. You know, and basically this is, you know, stuff that we're talking about the Planning Commission looking at. Well, some of it is. But we've talked also about tiny houses. I mean, that basically Fairfax has a, I guess I would call it an anti-trailer park ordinance, you know, just to describe it so people can understand. You know, so wheeled vehicle, you know, RVs, wheeled vehicles, stuff like that. And that's really what the tiny house thing is. And I would like to bring that forward so we can kind of granulate that in a way so that it you know, we don't get trailer parks, but we also are able to deal with tiny houses and that kind of thing. You know, maybe there's some way to look at that, but that obviously is a long exploration process. With the short-term rentals, I mean, when we looked at this a couple years ago, you know, we're like, well, where does the money come for, you know, monitoring that? We don't have staff to deal with it and stuff like that. And the transit occupancy tax, you know, seems like an obvious source for that funding. And maybe we should look at that at a future date also. Not necessarily in conjunction with this ordinance that the Planning Commission is going to go in, but I mean, if they're got the salivating over that, then don't hold back. You know, and it could be at the same time, you know, we don't have landlords registered for the same reason, because we don't have the staff, we don't have a rental department. You know, that's also, you know, one of the problems among many with rent control. I know, I guess if we are looking at this and circling back around and figuring out how to deal with that, I think that's good to do. And that's the end of my comments.
Okay, so before, sorry, Barbara, but I think we should summarize process and timeline on this. So could you walk us through what you think? Because I hear Stephanie really concerned, and Barbara, about the timeline and how fast we can get through creating a third ordinance. I am absolutely cognizant of the hard work that's going to be involved in the Planning Commission. So what's realistic? I heard Stephanie mention she might be interested in a separate study group or work group, or perhaps sort of workshopping experience around this. My preference is that we would have Senator McGuire come down here and do a very comprehensive housing bill workshop for us, and perhaps that could be incorporated in kind of a longish day so that the state can actually tell us what the heck is going on. So at this point, going forward, how do you see the next few months playing out, Ben, realistically? Give it like it is.
This we could be looking at this at the Planning Commission in January and February, and then potentially having something recommended to your council. The challenge is that, again, we're not going to take something to your council that isn't vetted, because that would be irresponsible. At some point, we could do the risk analysis, but you have to know what the risk is. So, and again, HCD, as Janet pointed out, they're being charged with many, many responsibilities that they haven't had. So all I could say is if your council wants the Planning Commission to deliver something after 2 meetings, we can do that. Whether it really gets to the bottom line of do we have answers with respect to, can we say that if you're in a high fire hazard area, we can ban it or limit triplexes or things like that, who knows? But we can explore that. Something else to keep in mind is that we're already looking at the very real possibility of doing 2 a month Planning Commission meetings in 2020 for our pending subdivision, major subdivision project, which, so I don't want to get into detail on that, but that is something that is very time sensitive and will require numerous meetings. So what happens is, not everything can be the highest priority, but depending on how things start to proceed forward or don't, we could probably, if that's your council's direction, to give it 2 meetings and then get something to the council or not, but understand that your council is going to be reviewing whatever they've got at that point. We could try to work on that basis.
We might want to say that we could potentially have something back here in March or April, give us a little bit of leeway there. Excuse me.
There's so many pieces that we may need to whittle down what are the most critical pieces before we're even going to take a look at amending this. And I would say, fire, obviously, not sure about affordability, as Deborah, alluded to, but fire, as relates to parking, what can we do? And I know it'll take a while to get back from HCD the definitive answer on that.
Well, I think the priority, and you correct me if this is not what your priority is, but the safety issues that deal with fire, with landslide.
Evacuation routes.
Yeah, evacuation routes. Those are the primary thing. And secondary to that would be the affordability issues connected with what can you do as far as affordability is concerned. That also ties into the short-term rental. So those are kind of the 2 big packages of things that need to be looked at, I think. Tell me if there's something else.
I think some of the issues that Frank raised in his email should be looked at as well. And if you have a copy of that.
Yes, we do.
But I think saying shoot for March, give the option of April, because it's too easy for these things to be shunted aside. So the council's saying this is a priority. And I would say this, Mayor, Senator McGuire came to San Anselmo a couple of months ago and gave a presentation. And the invite, I was there, the invite went out to a lot of folks on housing bills and what was coming. And I did ask him about coming to Fairfax, but given his schedule and, he's always open to everything, but his staff kind of cautioned against maybe there's another meeting in San Anselmo. And I said, well, let's make sure we get a broad invite out. So, because, it's not just our town that's interested in these things. So
I mentioned this to another council member in San Anselmo, and I was hoping that we could collaborate. And if Mike can't come.
So I brought that up at that meeting.
Great,
that let's make sure we get a broad invite out, because I'm not sure how many people got that.
I didn't see it.
But
okay.
Anyway,
Thanks.
so
All right.
I'm ready to make the motion.
I think
Sorry,
there's one
I just
more
have one more comment about the trees. Related to heritage trees. So I know you have the 2-for-1 provision in there, Ben. Janet, what is your feedback if a resident had a lot and was proposing wiping out, let's say, coastal redwoods or, 400-year-old oak, whatever, something that was on our protected list, right? but had ample square footage somewhere else on the lot for that ADU.
Well, certainly that would be pointed out to them, and we would try to achieve that. Right now, we don't have the provisions that would be able to stop them from doing that if they were really intent on doing that. But I think that, and I say that because keep in mind that we put in the local regulations about floor area ratio and lot coverage and all those things. There's still the provision in state statute, though, that says even if somebody has maxed out their lot size and there's still room to put an ADU in there, or that maxed out their lot coverage, and there's still room to put the ADU on there, they still get to put the ADU on there, regardless of whether you have a lot coverage provision in here or not, of at least 800 square feet, et cetera. So,
Right, I understand that.
The state is interested in having these things constructed. If there is other room on the lot, certainly we would be talking with them very strongly about placement of where it would be better to be placed.
But couldn't we add in stronger language to say, if you have square footage to put the ADU somewhere else on the lot, you got to protect those trees. I mean, there's environmental benefits to some of these trees.
I'm not arguing that there's not. That's something that we need to look at as far as staying in compliance with state statute on that. If it's the intent of a homeowner to put it in a certain place, if they had additional space, I know that if they don't have the additional space, we don't have any leeway with that.
But I think you could make a case for environmental benefits.
Okay.
Could you do something like what you did with the creek buffer? So where you had, for the trees, so where you added the creek buffer, instead of calling it a setback, you could say something about heritage tree buffer, so that you can, to the extent that there's other places on that lot, so in this new ordinance to be worked on, I would do it that way. I think that would still allow somebody to build an ADU if there's other spaces, but so I think some of that's semantics, but some of that helps us.
Good idea. Okay, so I would like to entertain a motion.
I'm ready to make it. Okay, it's a bit long because we added a new whereas. So I would say this: introduce and read by title only an ordinance titled "An Ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Fairfax amending 17.048 of the Fairfax Town Code relating to residential accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units, and determining the ordinance to be exempt from SEQA," plus adding, I believe it's the 7th whereas in the urgency ordinance, the first sentence only. The second sentence deals with it saying it's an urgency ordinance. I'll read it out. Whereas the approval of ADUs and JADUs based solely on the default statutory standards without local regulations, including but not limited to height, setback, landscape, architectural review, among other things, would threaten the character of existing neighborhoods and negatively impact property values, personal privacy, fire safety, flooding, and earthquake safety, soil stability in landslide-prone areas, and emergency evacuation, period. And then including the supplement that was provided with a change in the date, which would say this incentive program will expire on 11/1/2027.
Thank you, and is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, so we have a motion Kohler and a second Ackerman. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 And any opposed? I see none, so motion passes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for all the input. So moving on to the final item of this evening. This is agenda item number 4. And the recommendation here, we're discussing and considering the status report on the implementation of the council-approved modifications to the Cascade Striping Project and the formation of a resident subcommittee. And before we begin, it was called to my attention that I could perhaps have a conflict of interest with this item, being that I live on Cascade Drive, and I actually live within the area of the striping project. Where I don't believe that it meets the situation whereby I am required to recuse myself, in that it doesn't affect my property values by more or less than $10,000. I believe that to diffuse an already difficult situation, I am very open to leaving the room and leaving it all to you guys. I got involved because it is one of my areas of expertise. I've worked in public safety around transportation issues for decades, and I've raised my kids on Cascade Drive. So I've seen it all, and I wanted to get involved in order to help and continue the exploration of something that for many, many years has been looked at on Cascade. But I leave it to Bruce's able handling as our vice mayor to run the rest of the meeting, and John Reed will be, as he is a partner in this, in our neighborhood liaison committee, which is another conversation. John will be taking over for me in the capacity that I set out to be in. So,
Mayor, before you leave, I think it's 10 o'clock, and I think we normally just, if I'm right.
Yes, there is the 10 o'clock rule.
But I would assume we can finish up the last few things.
I'll move we waive the 10 o'clock rule and move forward.
Thank you. Second.
So happy holidays, everyone. I don't think I need to come back. Is that correct?
We just have council member reports, but we could probably do yours for you.
Okay.
It's not in the packet this time.
It's not in the packet.
So, as Renee explained, she and John have been a neighborhood liaison committee. And since due to Brown Act things, I'm not as connected with that neighborhood liaison committee, and also just because of the number of hours it takes. So and because we don't have Garrett here, I'm gonna ask John to take it from the staff report here and sort of introduce this item.
Okay, and yeah, and I guess I will read and interpret the staff report here, which you can see in the packet also. Before I get into that, I should probably say I've been dealing with some health problems in my family, and so I have been in and out of town. So I've been following the issue, but from a distance. So I haven't been attending to, as much as Renee has, but I'm back. So, I got back about a day and a half ago, and hopefully I won't have to leave soon. But basically my intention is, well, I'll get to it later in the thing. There's going to be a meeting this Saturday in this room at 10 o'clock, which Renee has already announced. And hopefully we'll drill into this in a good and way that we can all listen to each other in a positive way and come up with some good solutions. So the background of this is that at the December 4th meeting, the council received a report from staff and Parisi Transportation, who was the traffic engineer on this project, regarding some traffic calming purpose of the Cascade striping project. And the comments received from the neighborhood at the November 21st meeting, and options to consider with that. So at the December 4th meeting, we came up with a punch list of a bunch of things that we immediately gave staff direction to do, and those were adopt temporary changed conditions signs in both directions for traffic, just to warn people that that's not what they're used to going in there. Install curve warning signs at the appropriate locations with advisory speeds Basically, these are the yellow recommended speed for curves that you see often in a lot of places, and in fact, those are out there. I don't know if they're out there right now because I haven't been there in the last day and a half. Let me see, install no parking signs and/or red curbs in the two-way traffic area. Remove the 25 pavement marking and signs that may be unnecessary, e.g. like the slow children playing sign, which was, I felt that was pretty extraneous. Monitor the project, including seeing what the traffic speeds are now and any traffic incidents, any close calls or whatever, exactly what's going on. Evaluate the sight lines in the area, basically around the corners of Dockacre Park, impacted by parked cars, and add red curb markings as needed. And the other thing that was recommended to do is to form a resident subcommittee to be facilitated by Renee as mayor to provide, actually not as mayor, but basically as the person representing the council on the subcommittee, to provide suggestions to the council for consideration. Now I'm that point person. I guess I'm the only one because of Brown Act stuff. At this time, the council decided not to add dashed yellow center line striping through the curves. I mean, there was a little bit of back and forth there. Some of the council members felt like not adding those at this time. And that's what we finally settled out at, just to see how it's working at this point. The traffic engineer also indicated that the white fog line cannot be dashed per the traffic code, and that was one of the possible suggestions. We also, council did not direct staff to move the solid white line on the shoulder to one side of the road. That's where it switches from one side to the other if you're going from the middle of town towards the Laurel stop sign. There was some talk about putting all of that, the refuge behind the white line on the same side of the road the whole way. And we decided to keep it the way it's currently there. And I think the thinking on that was basically when bicycles are riding up that hill, it's kind of steep. They're going pretty slowly, and that's on that side that they're going up. And when bikes are riding down that hill, they're going pretty fast, and almost 15 miles an hour is what a lot of the cars seem to be doing. So in the discussion section, it says the temporary changed condition signs are in place, and the red curbs have been painted in the two-way traffic portion of the road. Staff also trimmed back a number of shrubs around the signs. And it says we will continue to monitor parking in the area to determine if no parking signage or additional red curb markings are required. Obviously, this is an ongoing, adjust as we go to see how things change and how people, how we can make this as safe as possible. With regard to project monitoring, staff report says the traffic engineer is conducting a speed survey in the area. I heard verbally last night that actually that speed survey was completed, and it supports a 15-mile-an-hour traffic limitation, speed limitation. So based on the council's direction, the traffic engineering is preparing a revised plan that's going to be at the Saturday meeting in this room. I saw a preliminary copy of that last night, and it's still, it had some things that I thought weren't quite done. So, and I think that Garrett was also talking about that as a preliminary plan. So it was not quite ready for prime time anyway. But it's definitely going to be here on Saturday, as will David Parisi and engineers and stuff like that. Upon receipt of the revised plan, staff and/or a contractor will implement the council-approved modifications. And I didn't write the staff report, so I'm not exactly sure what that means. I would not expect, the revised plans, the first time they're going to show up is Saturday, so none of this is going to happen before Saturday. I wouldn't interpret it that way. With regard to the formation of the subcommittee, we have scheduled the meeting on Saturday, December 21st at 10 a.m. at the Women's Club for residents to attend if they are interested in participating on the subcommittee. The focus of the meeting is for attendees to self-select representatives who will participate on the ad hoc committee. I'll discuss the role of the subcommittee here tonight at this council meeting. One role of the subcommittee would be to discuss any proposed modifications to the striping project, including the removal and restoration of the original striping. For example, the traffic engineer is recommending that the fog line should be narrowed by 1 foot in selected areas around the curve. And those were on that map that I looked at last night, and basically that's narrowing the pedestrian refuge area on the insides of the curves. So, in a couple of different places, part of it is the first real curve that you hit going up the hill, going up towards the Laurel stop sign, that there's one on the left there, and cars coming down that street. We're definitely, in my observation anyway, we're cutting off that, and it really, the trajectory of a vehicle makes sense to pull that back. Past the Laurel stop sign, approaching Dead Man's Curve, on the left-hand side, that first curve that you get to was also talking about pulling that back, just to make it easier to get around with a motor vehicle. And I think there's probably still enough refuge space there. Anyway, that's a recommendation that they're making. Those were not in what the council was directing to do, so that's not happening right now. I was thinking about going out and just getting some of that chalk paint. It washes off in the rain pretty well, but I think we're not going to get any rain before Saturday. So maybe that'll allow people to look at it a little bit, just to see what they're recommending. But that would be my own, just do it kind of thing. It's not an official.
I don't think it's a great idea to add anything to it right now. I think you'd be better off talking to the group on Saturday and the subcommittee before you start adding things.
Okay. Well, yeah, I thought it might be useful as a talking tool, but basically that's why I'm bringing that up here, is because right now in this paragraph that I'm reading right now is talking about what that role of that subcommittee should do, and that's basically at council's direction. One of the things that it's been suggested to me to ask from this council is if there's something minor that the subcommittee is recommending, such as, and I guess it's up for us to decide how minor is minor.
Well,
whether it's okay for me as the council representative on that committee just to talk to staff and we'll just get it done. That makes it happen fast.
I would say one suggestion I have is to add someone to the subcommittee, and I'm not recommending myself. I think Stephanie potentially, I'm not sure of her interest, as somebody who's really objective, who doesn't drive down that road all the time, might be a good addition. So you have kind of two folks on the council, because last time we did appoint a subcommittee and that subcommittee's broken up into one now. So I would think that. But the other thing I just wanted to add is I feel really strongly about adding the dash yellow line on the curves now. And one of my thoughts was, because this really wasn't vetted with the community and it is an emergency evacuation route, one option would be to, and this is something your subcommittee can decide on, is put it back and then really vet it with the community. So you're starting from sort of square one. But if that's not the option, I think the yellow dashed lines should be added to this list of things to at least throw out there with the subcommittee on Saturday. And I would really recommend that you continue having a partner on that subcommittee, because that would, I think, be helpful for all of us, and
Yep.
especially you, so it's not just totally falling on your shoulders.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes?
The speed, so I drove out there yesterday in preparation for tonight, because I don't go out there that often. And I've been reaching out to friends who live out there just because it's been a couple weeks now, and as we've talked about, how are people settling into it, right? Because it's a change management thing. We all know that people kind of freak out, and then how are people settling in? And I've reached out to people that are specifically not Nextdoor users because I don't think Nextdoor is a representative sample. I don't mean to offend anyone that uses Nextdoor, but I don't necessarily think it's a representative sample of the population. Anyway, most of the people I've talked to are still feeling rather uncomfortable just sharing. So my question is, the traffic engineer is conducting a speed survey. I didn't see anything out there. Is it like a hidden camera, or how are they capturing speed?
I don't know. I heard that the area that they did use was at the end of the wider section of Cascade and the entrance to this project.
Okay, Ben, do you know? Does anyone?
My understanding is typically they have the trailer, the radar trailer out there, and it's recording what they're reading.
Usually, if those are sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
They're fairly obvious, but yeah.
Because when they're so visible, then that's
we
not
would
really
have
effective.
to direct that question at the police department, find out what they, or Parisi, and find out what they were using.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. That was it?
That's probably a question that could be answered on Saturday, though.
Yeah, that would be an excellent question for Saturday. I mean, I'm just parenthetically stating that I was told that last night.
Yeah, I was also told that a speed survey had been more or less completed, and that it seemed to point to 15 miles an hour, which I think is good news, because it sounds like everyone agrees that traffic calming is the goal. The question is how to get there without making something else less safe. So it seems like good news to be able to find out that you can actually have an enforceable lower speed limit.
Is it time to get public comment, or no? Are we still deliberating or talking?
Yeah, this item is a report, but we could take public comments on it. But just understanding that the main focus is that we're moving toward this Saturday, 10 a.m. in this room, having the opportunity for people primarily from Cascade to be able to speak with Parisi directly and give feedback, and hopefully to self-select a smaller group that can continue to advise on this. So I'll open public comment at this point.
Deborah Benson, 370 Cascade Drive. I am firmly opposed to the striping. I really want to see it go back to the way it was, and as Barbara said, start from square one with community involvement. It was a huge mistake to change our neighborhoods so drastically without any public input. I feel I've driven up and down that road for 27 years, twice a day. I have never felt so afraid for my life. It feels like people are not slowing down, and every time you encounter a car, it feels like a game of chicken, where you don't know, and I'm driving in the fog lines because it's the only way I feel safe, but you don't know if the car who's coming towards you is some scaredy cat who's afraid to cross the fog line, and you're going to have a head-on because there's no room to go any further to the right. I almost killed someone the other night. It was terrifying. It was dark. It was raining. I was coming up towards Laurel, where there's that skinny little pedestrian fog line walkway. There was a car coming through the stop sign, bright lights in my eyes. I'm, again, playing chicken, not knowing what's going on. So I pulled over across the white line. There's a person who I would never have expected to see before this striping happened, who's walking in dark clothes in that little pathway with his back to the traffic. I didn't see him until just about the last minute. This car passed me. I was able just at that microsecond to move away, and this guy jumped up on the portion of the sidewalk that at that second became accessible, because before that there were cars parked. And that would have changed my life, and it probably would have ended his, and I was not speeding. I think it's a terrible, terrible idea, and I would really like to see it taken back to the way that it was. Thank you.
Mark Bell Domingo. Stephanie, I drove it today too. I didn't see you. Sorry. The slow children sign is still there. There's some other sign about a curve ahead or something that looks like someone already ran into it. I think someone posted a picture of that on the IJ or something. Not a particularly good look when you put up a sign and it's now bent all the way over. The middle striping needs to go back. And there's also some, well, among the many contradictions that occurred at the last meeting, some people were saying the road wasn't narrower. The traffic engineers were saying the road is narrower, but it's still 6.5 feet. Well, the car I drive is about the size of a 96 Honda Accord. It's not 6.5 feet or 6 feet across. And I was basically on the shoulder line and across what was left of the center line, the way it's striped. So there's not enough room there, and you need some type of guidance that goes on. What I would like, though it may not be part of tonight's discussion, is there are a lot of contradictions. A lot of contradictions in the IJ versus what was said at the meeting. What was said at the meeting was that the town of Fairfax didn't pay anything. We didn't pay $19,000, that this was all from a grant from Safe Routes to Schools. In the IJ, it said that Parisi's consulting fee was paid by Safe Routes to Schools, but the Fairfax paid $19,000 for the striping. There are many other contradictions. Minimal involvement from John Reed and Renee Goddard, but 2 years ago, but like nothing really in the interim. So like how come all of a sudden they're out there doing this striping when nobody talked to anybody? But there was also 2 years ago a check for $10,000 that went for Parisi. Was that for an afternoon hanging out with them? I mean, this is, you know, overall, just like the microcosm of your macrocosm of why people don't trust the town council or the town staff.
Chris Kenton, Cascade. So I'm solidly on the other side of this. We've been asking for 20 years for there to be traffic calming measures on Cascade, and almost nothing's been done. We're finally doing something that I understand people who have resistance to the loss of the center line. But if you look at the research, there is very solid behavioral engineering research for what center lines do to people's behavior. What they do is they tend to believe that they own the lane that they're in, and they take that lane and cruise right through. When you remove that lane, people have to navigate with the traffic in front of them. And it does take time for that to settle in. I don't know, that's something that you need to look at the traffic engineering studies for how long is a settling period, a proper settling period need to be in order to measure that change. But one thing I'll say is if you're saying that, and I understand that this has not been entered as information yet, but if you're saying that the traffic study that was done is showing support for a drop to 15 miles an hour, that would constitute a 7-mile-per-hour drop in speed from the last traffic engineering study that I heard the last time that we were doing traffic calming. If that's true, then it is working. The other thing that I would say is that there's a lot of misinformation being spread. There was stories about how the narrowing of the street is going to somehow cause our insurance rates to go up double or triple, or that we're going to lose our insurance because of fire egress, because of some article that was in the Chronicle about risk assessments. I actually called the company that does those risk assessments, a company called Verisk. They use GIS data that they source from public databases. When I asked them and told them what was going on, and people were saying, oh, well, the street's now been narrowed, and they're therefore going to say that access has been narrowed, that emergency response is going to be impacted, and our insurance rates are going to go up. The engineer told me that was literally crazy. These GIS codes are typically set when streets are laid out. When they're first built, they typically do not change. I couldn't even find somebody who could tell me what the process was for changing the GIS codes. I spoke to a Caltrans engineer from District 4, which is our district. I spoke to a USGS who manages the data that gets supplied to Verisk. Nobody even knew that there was a process for changing the encoding. So the notion that painting stripes on the street is suddenly going to lead to a reassessment by an insurance company and all of our insurance rates are going to go through the roof or be canceled is literally absurd. So there's a lot of misinformation that's being spread, and what I'd like to say at this point is we need to get beyond anecdotes and passionate opinions and focus on the data. However this was rolled out, and nobody is saying that this was rolled out well, but we do have something in place now that actually does meet traffic calming standards, ones that are used all over the world. So to simply use opinion to say that we need to go back or roll everything back rather than measuring it with a proper time, to me doesn't make any fiscal sense. Thank you.
Just to clarify one thing regarding that, no physical change has been made to the road or is being contemplated unless there has been a little bit of trimming of hedges, and that would be a good thing. But nothing to narrow the road has been done or contemplated. So as far as evacuation, presumably the whole road would be used to evacuate as needed.
Lamorna Swigert from Cascade, and I would just thank the previous gentleman. I also am on the side of supporting the traffic calming measures that have been put in place. I travel it up and down every day as well. I have not had any impression that I have been anywhere close to any other car that has been any sort of source of anxiety to me. So I do think it's working, and I just want to sort of balance the other comments that, I think we should give this some time, let it settle in, keep measuring it, and continue to see how it is performing before we wipe it back to the way it was and start again. Thank you.
Hi, I live up off of Laurel, so that's my everyday path as well. And I left town right on the 21st, so I couldn't be at that meeting, and I didn't get back in time for last council meeting, so I missed some of the conversation and input. I've been following some of the things on Nextdoor and other places. And when I first experienced it, in the first few days, I was like, oh, something's different. What's going on here? And I wasn't sure exactly what was happening. And at first glance, I was like, oh, maybe this has gotten a little better. It looks like there's some boundaries now for people that live here or whatever. And, oh, there's some signs here now, and that's kind of helpful. But as I've heard different input, all things being optimal, the process would have happened differently. And to go back to how it was and start from scratch, I don't know if that's really necessary. I'm kind of in between both sides. I really feel for Deborah. It's a very scary thing to feel like you almost hit somebody, and it definitely gets weird as you're approaching the stop sign at Laurel and beyond in some of the curved areas. I also hear the other neighbors' side of things as well, and I feel like we're here now. The process wasn't great. Would have been nice to vet things and get community involvement ahead of time. But maybe we should just kind of hang with it for a few months and see where we are, and then have some kind of, I'm all for hard data, but also just for polling everybody, that all of us that use that road every day. And is it better or worse? Is it safer? You know, I mean, I'm going to be honest, like, it does get narrow, and I'm going over the white line, you know, every day to make sure that I have enough space and I feel safe. There were a couple of awkward times that as I got to that intersection, I felt like, well, which one of us gets to pass? We're in one of those, it was like being up on a narrow, windy hill in town of which I live off of, like right on the main street. So, you know, from the standpoint of evacuation and emergency vehicles and fire and all the kinds of things we all talk about all the time, I mean, the road's still the same size. People will go wherever they need to go, and if there's gridlock, there's gridlock, and like what lines are there is not going to affect that one way or another. One thing I would mention just anecdotally, and I'm only a sample size of one, I've noticed already a couple of cars that were parking inside the white were a little bit over it and were buttressing out a little bit, and I was like, ugh, getting a little too close now. So maybe it's not perfect yet, and maybe I'm glad there's going to be meetings and committees and people looking at it and really trying to study it carefully. And you know, where we're starting from scratch, that was great. I wasn't even sure what the objective was, so I'm hearing this term traffic calming, so I guess that means everybody's going too fast or something. I would just say again, anecdotally, sample size of one, it does seem to me that people are driving a little slower now. So if that was the goal, it's maybe being partially achieved, but that's just my random observation. And then the last thing I would just throw in, if this ever comes up, because I don't know that I'm going to be able to be at all these meetings, is the thing that I would always like to see more of are the, and maybe these aren't allowed on this type of road or it creates other problems, but the little reflector things that get down on the actual surface so that when you bump into them and you're like falling asleep at night, you get that wake up, but also because we have so much darkness in our town and things are so not well lit, and particularly in this time of the year when it's foggy and wet, you know, the headlights catch that reflective. I'm sure there's a technical name for what those things are called. I don't know what it is. But anyway, so if that's even something that could be thought about, even a few of them just to help as you're kind of coming from a distance and it's dark and you can kind of see it, your headlight catches it or whatever. So anyway, I would say since we are where we are, to give it, in fairness, give it a little time as people are giving input and discussing the pros and the cons or whatever. And you know, if there's some neighbors that feel they've been waiting 20 years for something to happen, let's give it a few months, and the money's been spent, and maybe there'll be some tweaks, and maybe we'll go back to how it was. But anyway, so I'm kind of in the middle there. Thank you.
Steve White, Cascade Drive. I want to thank Renee. She's not here, for recusing herself. I think that was a good choice. I just want to be clear when it goes back to the council that she won't be part of the committee either. I just think it's still a conflict of interest. I believe the road should go back the way it was. It's not safer. There's less room to share with cars. There's no shoulder on the north side of the road. There's brick walls, there's retaining walls all around the blind corners. The double yellow needs to go back. You have on your website that the 4-foot shoulder is reserved for pedestrians. It's in complete conflict with what Parisi said here the other night. He said that that shoulder area on the other side of the fog line was for vehicles, bikes, and cars. Anyone could go in it, but your website says it's reserved for pedestrians. Whatever becomes of the ad hoc committee, anything that they talk about should come back to council and be voted upon. And what I'd really like to see tonight is someone make a motion and put it back the way it was, start from scratch. It would show even more good faith in giving the neighborhood what everybody would like. Everyone would like traffic calming, and everybody wants a safe road, and it's just more dangerous. The painting, you've put red stripes in front of homes. You can't stop in front of a home with a red stripe. I don't know how much thought was put into that. Making no parking on corners where I've lived there for 25 years, never seen a car parked there, only seen a UPS truck parked there. And now you got a red line. I personally think that would speed vehicles up. If I'm not from the area and I see a red painted curb, I'm going to come cruising around that corner. There's not going to be anybody there. You can't get a mail delivery legally. You can't get UPS. You can't. It's just needs to be more thought out. It looks like it was rushed. I've heard traffic calming was proposed for the Dominga Avenue. and it didn't get pushed through. It was controversial. It's amazing that town staff didn't know that this was going to be an issue and went ahead and did this work without presenting it to the community first. Thank you.
Frank Hager, Meadow Way, speaking for Save Fairfax. The Ross Valley Fire Chief has said Cascade Canyon may be the worst in the county for the threat of wildland fire. He said access and egress contributes to that. No one opposes slowing down traffic and making Cascade from Meadow to 155 Cascade safer for pedestrians. Fairfax has had no traffic counts for Cascade Drive. We don't know how many vehicles travel that road daily. That should be part of any kind of a traffic survey. Cascade Drive is the only Cascade Canyon evacuation route for up to 1,500 residents. And we know and we know the dangers that's out there. The Kincaid fire was traveling 1 mile per minute with winds of 60 to 70 miles an hour. Under the right conditions, a fire could come out of the Elliott Nature Preserve with heavy winds and be at Bolinas Road in 2 minutes. Narrowing the driving lanes from 2 to 1 and reducing width from Meadow to 155 Cascade Drive is putting Cascade residents in severe danger during an emergency fire evacuation. Cities have relied on certain immunities for their actions. The new sign installed says road narrows. In addition to PG&E, the City of Paradise will be sued by those who lost homes and surviving family members of those who perished in the Camp Fire because of their vote to reduce and narrow lanes for traffic calming on evacuation routes. While everyone is suing PG&E in Sonoma County, the County of Sonoma has just been sued over the Tubbs fire because of what they did not do to protect their residents. The Cascade Drive public right-of-way is mostly 40 feet wide. The pavement between Meadow and 155 Cascade is probably around 20 to 22 feet wide, leaving sufficient room for sidewalks in many locations. Residents protect their privacy, and some screen their homes with vegetation, hedges, bamboo, and other plantings. Others have put in retaining walls. The California Highway Patrol enforces lane straddling and driving in fog line area and bike lanes. They cite for that. Fairfax needs to enforce the state vehicle code that prohibits parking on sidewalks. We were sued years ago because of an injury accident on Belmont. Fairfax allowed parking on the sidewalk. We went to court, defended the town, and we lost. And the reason we lost was Fairfax did not enforce parking on the sidewalk in that area. We forced folks into the street. Fairfax has red painted curbs, but allowed parking on sidewalk areas and forces pedestrian into the street on Cascade Drive from 220 down to 190. In a new lane that allows driving, walking, and biking as part of this project, Fairfax needs to mark out the actual right-of-way. The Breeze plan from 20 years ago took advantage of the public right-of-way for pedestrians. Time we reclaim that public right-of-way and make our roadways safe for pedestrians. Thank you very much.
Anybody else wishing to comment? Okay, closing public comment.
Okay, yeah, and perhaps in reading this staff report, I should have also mentioned, oh, thank you, Deborah. The process on how we got here, too. It's true that Renee and I were both in a conversation, I guess it was in 2016, several years ago. When we're talking about, a variety of neighbors have talked, anybody that lives along there has known that it's always been a dangerous curve. And it's called Dead Man's Curve for a reason. I believe it was in the 90s, right, Frank, when somebody was killed there? At any rate, so that conversation, unfortunately, was the only time that Renee or I had interaction with this process that was going on. And Garrett has made multiple apologies for basically going ahead. You know, I should probably say, and I did not talk this over with Garrett, but I happen to know that he is basically taking the hit that he for somebody else also. You know, I mean, he shares neglect in letting people know what was going on, but basically the person contracting some stuff, not David Parisi, the architect, but the, you know, person also working in conjunction with that, also didn't have the public input on the radar, which I think is inexcusable, to be honest. And it's something that really, you know, town staff and the council is learning for, that we have to have some very definite structures in place to make sure there's public input on things. That's something that we can chalk up to lessons learned. But I think the fact remains is that people have been finding a problem with this section of roadway for decades, and it's a scary place. I mean, it's physically constrained, sight lines, things like that, and a lot of people with different uses have to share this area. And unfortunately, if somebody's driving a car, they are a lot less vulnerable than somebody who's, you know, a kid walking down the street or whatever it is. And there's got to be a balance there. Obviously, nobody wants to cause a head-on collision, and that's why cars are slowing down, is because they don't want to be a part of that thing. And Deborah, your, you know, anecdote where you know, were getting out of the way of a car and then there was a pedestrian there. I mean, it's a heads up to everybody. But one of the things that I heard repeated complaints about before was cars were acting as if it was only cars using that, going through that section for years, and, you know, basically anybody else was fearing for their life. I mean, I know that I also had that experience myself. So we need to get to a place where we can all find something that works for all the users. And that's what the objective of this workshop or the subcommittee meeting on Saturday is. I would welcome another council member from up here, you know, just because it's useful to have a number of people there. Is that you, Stephanie?
I'm happy to do it.
Good. I'll look forward to working with you then.
Thank you.
And
so
anyway,
do we need a
gonna
motion to change the subcommittee? Because last time we appointed you and Renee to that subcommittee, and if we need a motion that the council is appointing Stephanie and you to that subcommittee?
Would that be the ongoing neighborhood liaison
No,
subcommittee?
there
or
is
just a
no
Cascade
actually
subcommittee?
neighborhood liaison committee. I think it's been ad hoc as need be. It's not on the list. But I think just for this particular project at the last meeting, we designated John and Renee to lead up that subcommittee. So I think for this project, then it would be, I'm recommending that we formalize it and make a motion that Stephanie and John comprise that subcommittee.
yeah, especially because, yeah, I'm fine with that. Does that make sense, Janet? Okay. Well, would you like to?
So I just made that motion. So moved. Somebody want to
Okay,
second
I'll
that?
second it. Or maybe Bruce, you should. Well, no, actually, you're acting mayor, so I'll second it.
Yeah.
So.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Anyone opposed?
I also wanted to share with the public that updates are being provided on the public website on this project. And I think they're also being provided on Nextdoor, but that can be difficult to find. And so I wanted to encourage residents to go to the website as the official destination for updates on this project.
Yeah, I think that's an important point to make. Because as we all know, Nextdoor is Yeah, it's
not the official communication channel
Yeah,
for
and it really shouldn't be, because there's all kinds of stuff on
town
there.
council business.
Pretty mixed up, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, I look forward to meeting with everybody concerned with this Saturday at 10 a.m. And thank you very much.
I would really encourage people from who support it or in any position to come to that meeting.
So Bruce, I would make a recommendation that instead of doing council reports and comments, that we move, hold that to the January meeting. That way Renee can be part of that and it can be part of our packet. Does that make sense?
We did have the written council reports in the last packet. They were written
so
in
this
there.
would
So
be
this would
for
just be
subsequent to that.
discussing them, yeah.
So I would make a motion to move council reports and comments to the January 15th meeting.
I second.
Okay.
Yep.
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
We're not done yet, adjourn. So Bruce, are you going to adjourn the meeting?
I guess so. That would be. And we have an adjournment in memory of, and there are several names here, John Cronin, Adolph Ardito, Claire Grossbaum, Dorothy Neal, and Frank Berto. So with that, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you. Happy holidays.